across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. Welcome back to the home of Common Sense. Thank you to Julia. She's back tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. So Kemi Badenoch says hitting net zero by 2050 is impossible, with the Tory leader arguing that achieving it would either lower living standards or bankrupt the country. I'd suggest it could probably do both. Can the Tories lead the way on net zero? We'll look at that question, and some interesting voices will be joining us. Also this afternoon, Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall says the current social security system is failing the very people it's supposed to help and holding our country back. Translation, we're skint and we don't know what to do, as she unveils a range of reforms, including scrapping the work capability assessment by 2028. There's a lot to look at in this. It's happening as we speak. They're live in Parliament, or sort of live. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin is expected to demand a halt to all weapon deliveries to Ukraine during a 30-day ceasefire proposed by Donald Trump, as the pair discuss the plans in a call today. Anything that breaks during this show or during Drive with Jezza will bring you the latest. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. We'll talk to Robert Taylor as well in just a few moments, joining us on the big stories. This one I thought was this was kind of interesting and quite a difficult sell, really, if you're the Conservatives, to start getting all evangelical about why net zero is wrong and why targets are unachievable and why the cost is astronomical and why it might ban. Bearing in mind all of that, most of this happened under the Tories. And I'm sorry that if you're part of the Tory front bench and Labour take on policies that came from you, you've got to weather that for probably a couple of years yet. This is seismic stuff. These are not like tiny little amendments on a law or a bill. These are big game-changing elements of substantial policy of our times. It's the kind of stuff that will be written in the history books. It's that big. Think the Industrial Revolution. It's something as seismic as that, and all that goes with net zero. She's warning the government's target of hitting net zero by 2050 is a fantasy. This was her government that came up with these numbers and the whole net zero bandwagon on which they all jumped. She says that can only be achieved with a serious drop in our living standards or bankrupting us. And I sense... look, here's the thing with net zero and any of these kind of climate debates. I don't really know anyone who doesn't want a cleaner climate. I mean, it would be such a weird disposition to say, hi, nice to meet you, my name's Frank, and I am actively campaigning for a dirtier climate. I mean, that would be bizarre. Everyone wants a cleaner planet, and as we progress through the 21st century, isn't it fantastic that we can now live in a world where things look very different from the old smog-ridden chimneys from the days gone by. We recycle stuff, we make roads out of different things, buildings are constructed using materials that didn't even exist back in the day. We are mindful of how we design and engineer cars, and of course we look very differently at how we energise and fuel our homes. It's an unrecognisable picture from where we were what seems not half an hour ago. When most of us were growing up, none of this stuff mattered as the coalman knocked on the door to deliver a latest sackful of the stuff that was going to go on your beautiful fire to heat your home, while simultaneously sending your granddad down a mine, recycling absolutely nothing other than milk bottles. Never called it recycling. People didn't even know they were recycling other than that. So we're in a completely different place anyway. Nobody's going to tell me that the planet, in conventional terms, in everyday terms, is not getting cleaner. There's sort of an organic process to this stuff. You look at the archdeacon of all things stupid, I've even forgotten his name, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Sadiq Khan, who's gone absolutely nuts on his ULEZ cameras. He wants to get rid of the bad cars, get cars that won't exist anyway. Given an obvious amount of time, couple of years, they'll be gone. You won't need the ULEZ cameras, except they will need them because they'll find another implementation. The point being is that, you know, we're living in a world that is already cleansing itself, and modern progress and the various elements of the wheels of commerce that turn on a daily basis have meant that we live in a world unrecognisable in terms of how clean our air is and the kind of stuff we do with how we get around the place. Unrecognisable from even a decade ago. So stuff is already changing, which is why it came as a bit of a shock when the net zero evangelists pitched up and went, no, you ain't doing nowhere near enough, mate. You got to really change. Otherwise, we're all going to die. That seems to be the kind of target incentive that we will die. I mean, literally parts of the planet will die. I don't imagine, I honestly, and I say this, and I say this to Dale Vince whenever I record stuff with Dale, I make the same point. I don't imagine that the doomsday scenario is going to be realised if we somehow continued going to Ibiza once every couple of years on a Beano with the lads. You know, I don't think we're going to die. Kemi Badenoch has now picked up on this. She's breaking that cross-party consensus, because ordinarily it would be cross-party, something as big as this. And she said something that I thought was, and by the way, this target, the 2050 thing, see Theresa May for details, because she was on the throne, as it were, back in 2019 when this all happened. But this, I thought, was the most powerful line she came out with. I mean, Kemi Badenoch has criticised the Theresa May 2050 thing. She said this: a multi-trillion-pound, 30-year project touching every single aspect of our lives was decided in 90 minutes without a single vote. And among the MPs who spoke that day, only a handful sounded notes of caution. I was one of them, she says. So she can say, OK, not me, Gov. I didn't adopt this 2050 thing. I don't go with it. I'm not even fully au fait and on board with the doomsday scenario. She says she accepts climate change exists. She wants to leave a better environmental inheritance for her kids. She says Labour doesn't have a plausible plan for hitting the targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we are now in a very curious place where, for the first time, there is a divide on this seismic issue of net zero, and the Tories want to lead the way. Serious question, can the Tories lead the way on net zero? A lot of people have distrusted the Tories and gone elsewhere, Reform UK being the chief beneficiaries, if you like, of former disgruntled Conservatives. But do you trust them on this? Can the Tories lead the way on net zero? Can they lead the way to a more balanced approach to, you know, getting a cleaner environment and stuff like that? I think that's such a powerful line. A project, 3-decade project, touching everyone's lives in so many areas at huge cost, was decided in 90 minutes without a single vote. Think about that for a second. Completely changing, recalibrating, altering and morphing the way this country works and does business, the rules and regulations around your life, what you do socially, God knows what else, was decided in an hour and a half without a vote. 0344 499 1000. Give me your overarching observations, if you would, on net zero. What do you think is going on there? What is going on with this? Bearing in mind, you couldn't achieve it anyway, because you'd have to have every country doing exactly the same thing. We know that isn't going to happen. See China, India, even to a degree now the United States for details. 0344 499 1000. We'll get a couple of voices on this a little later. Robert Taylor is with us, political commentator and journalist. Robert, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
It's an interesting one, this. It was a big speech from Kemi Badenoch, and of course one I think could reasonably argue, Robert, that this was maybe the first substantial area where she has drawn a line in the sand. She's criticised this 2050 target. She's called it a fantasy. She says it risks lowering living standards and bankrupting families. Let's have a quick listen to what she said.
Net zero by 2050 is impossible. I don't say that with pleasure. I want a better future and a better environment for our children, but we have to get real. Anyone who has done any serious analysis knows it cannot be achieved without a significant drop in our living standards, or worse, by bankrupting us.
So, big words. She can safely say, Robert, even though she was part of the last government, but when certainly 2019 Theresa May made these announcements, she was very critical of it at the time. But can the Tories lead the way on this?
Well, I think they can. I think what she's saying is common sense, and it's actually great to hear her come out and make a major policy announcement in a way. I'm assuming what this means is the Tories, if they get in, will go against that Theresa May decision to make 2050 net zero by law. I'm assuming the Tories would overturn that. Now, first of all, it's really good that Badenoch, I think she likes to be called, has come out and actually said, we're going to do something major, because we haven't heard enough from her in the last 6 months, and she's left the door open to Farage to make all the running. That's fantastic. I agree with her. I think net zero by 2050 is a fantasy. I think net zero is a great thing to aim for, but can we do it by 2050? The people who put in place that law in 2019 in Theresa May's government had no plan for how we were going to reach net zero by 2050. No plan at all. So they had an aspiration and they put it into law, but no plan. And Badenoch is saying that's not good enough.
And it was interesting, the way, as Kemi Badenoch said, look, this was just, there was no vote on this. It was just sort of all decided, signed and sealed, and then all the parties, the good and the great, you know, just sage-like nods of the head. Yes, of course we agree with it. It was kind of sold to our politicians, almost like, it was like asking them, do you support a world without any racism? It was kind of asked in that sort of spirit. And of course, everyone goes, well, yeah, obviously I would support that. And similarly with this, too many parliamentarians who can't think on their own sort of jumped on this one, Robert, joined in with it because it sounded like the right thing to do.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, Ian, that ordinary people feel that way as well. Most of us, you've asked people on the street, you know, do you applaud the attempts to reach net zero? People will say absolutely. But then if you say to them, would you pay higher taxes, your own personal taxes go up to achieve net zero by, let's say, 2050, and then people are not so sure. So I think Badenoch has reached the right sort of balance here between the Miliband's on the left who are gung-ho for net zero at all costs. Then you've got Richard Tice on Badenoch's right, who says he's sceptical about climate change existing. I think she's found the middle ground, and I think most British people would actually applaud her middle ground.
Yeah. She mentioned like certain specifics. She said like the heat pump target at the current rate would take 340 years to get to. I mean, look, I mentioned Dale Vince a second ago, you know, as an arch evangelist of net zero. He speaks very openly, very passionately. That's his thing, and that's great. But even Dale doesn't believe in the heat pump thing. You know, it's like he says, it's just the kind of the worst mechanism to try and change the way we do business. But Ed Miliband, he's absolutely glued to this caper.
He is, but then we have the highest energy costs in the world. So, yeah. Or certainly in the Western world, but I think our energy prices are 4 times what they are in the United States. I mean, it's extraordinary if you think about it. And are people in Britain going to carry on paying through the nose for this lovely thing called renewable energy if it's 4 times what our cousins in the States are paying? I don't think people are, especially when you think, even if Britain reached net zero by 2050, what is that going to do to the planet as a whole? And the answer is not very much.
It's a good point. Let's move to this story. The other big showdown happening as we speak. Keir Starmer pressing ahead with plans for a £1 billion cut in benefit payments. Rachel Reeves defending the reform, stressing the need to get Britain working again. Let's have a listen to the Chancellor on this very issue.
We know that the welfare system is not working. It's not working for taxpayers, it's not working for our economy, and it's not working for people on benefits who are stuck on those benefits rather than being given the support to get back into meaningful work. Everyone who can work should be working, and this government is determined to provide the support as well as reform the welfare system to ensure that work always pays.
Well, as it turned out, Robert, Liz Kendall was today addressing Parliament, Work and Pensions Department. The reform saving $5 billion, the $6 billion not quite, $5 billion by 2030. And look, when I listen to all the various voices around this, and we can, if you look at it just on the financial side, you can go, OK, it's a saving. But I don't think that's going to even touch the sides, because as you pull out that $5 billion, the increase in those needing or wanting to make a claim will have increased so substantially in the next 5 years or so that I take an educated guess the $5 billion will be wiped out.
Yeah, it's a welcome start, and it's great to see a Labour government, with perhaps rather surprisingly, slashing benefits in this way. Something that many of us, I think, would like to have seen the last Tory government do, but they failed to do it for whatever reason. I think this is more about the spring statement. It's more about the OBR forecasts, and clearly Rachel Reeves wants to show that she is cutting back, hoping, I imagine, that the OBR will give her a better sort of forecast for growth in the future and the public finances than it would otherwise give her. But it's a good start. I think it's ridiculous that we're due to pay £30 billion a year as a country by 2030 on these personal independence payments. And of course, the overall bill for disability and sickness benefits is I think it's 100 billion a year now. It will be by the end of the decade, which is more than the education budget. It's around what the education budget is. Of course, it's way too much. Of course, it's unsustainable. And at least Labour is beginning to recognise that.
We're going to be, between NHS spending, things like obesity being the obvious thing, diabetes could bankrupt us alone by 2030. You've got the benefit and the welfare system out of control by 2030. We're only going to be paying almost for these two things in life. And I've never heard a politician, left or right, come up with a real seismic plan as to how to address this. There's a calamity coming down the way in the next decades. We are going to watch, not with popcorn, but with tears, I think, in our eyes. Robert, stay with us. Robert Taylor, the journalist and political commentator, looking at the big stories of the day. There's loads more of that to come. By the way, a couple of voices going to be joining us on that issue of net zero just shortly. We've got Ben Pyle with us, co-founder of Climate Debate UK. Ben is a very robust voice and very hesitant, shall we say, on the desires to achieve net zero. But Edmund Gemmell, leader of the Climate Party, has other ideas. Both of these guys with us a little later. More comment from you on the way. I'm asking the question, bearing in mind this is a departure for Kemi Badenoch. The more you digest this, you can at least see the significance that the groupthink on net zero from Westminster has been, that bubble has been burst by Kemi Badenoch today. She's taken a different approach. The Tories have never done this before. Net zero was their idea. She can claim she wasn't part of that at the time. She didn't even support it at the time. And today she's taking a different route. Can the Tories lead the way on this debate? 0344 499 1000.
no issue with that, but when extremely controversial and being anti-British, do we really want to be giving them the money?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, people have said, well, what's wrong with them being anti-British? Well, there's nothing wrong with it. If they want to have that view, they're called the Lambrini girls, by the way. But you shouldn't be giving them government money. Lisa Nandy, apparently, the culture minister, has come out and said that they're the best of British culture.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
1:25. We have Robert Taylor, the journalist and political commentator, with us, looking at the big stories of the day. Let's move to this one. 20,000 civil servants, Robert, have their credit cards frozen. I think the takeaway that most people would have made from this is, why would 20,000 civil servants even given a credit card in the first place, and what sort of wiggle room and ability to spend did they have on those cards? We know that 175,000 quid civil servant funded by us issued a list of demands including 10 a.m. starts and early finishes on Fridays. So, I mean, you know, they're a curious bunch over there, and to be given a credit card as well on things like buying glassware or sparkling wine or a Home Office escape room day out, goodness me. You can see the waste trickling by the second here.
Well, yeah, and again, it's Keir Starmer's Labour acting more like we would have liked the Tories to have acted a year or so ago. Who could argue against freezing credit cards for civil servants when the amount that has been spent by those civil servants on credit cards has, according to reports, quadrupled in the last 4 or 5 years? How can it have quadrupled? What are they doing to spend so much on credit cards? So I absolutely applaud what the cabinet, the minister for the cabinet, this is Pat McFadden, is doing here. Saw him on various clips this morning, and I was nodding along and saying, absolutely more power to your elbow.
Yeah, fair dues. It does. I mean, this has happened for years, hasn't it? I mean, if you really wanted to, like, have your eyes burned from your head on reading worrying and disturbing headlines, if we looked at this story over the last 30 years of how much civil servants had spent, and I know not the average civil servant doesn't get a credit card, but 20,000 of them were getting these things, and I'm sure the average one doesn't go out and buy themselves lovely items of crystal glass for the office, but many of them have. I mean, it is an absolute scandal that this was ever the case, and let's hope it's the start of the clear-up.
Well, absolutely right. And Labour is now realising that public expenditure is completely out of control, that we're spending more than ever before. We're taxing people and therefore cutting off growth in order to fund all this expenditure. And savings have to be found. Yeah. They didn't say this when they were in opposition, by the way, but they're saying it now. Well, better late than never. And I applaud them for what they're doing on this.
Let's move to what is going to be an ever-growing story. The Trump administration considering recognising Ukraine's Crimea region as Russian territory, as this could be part of any deal to end that 3-year war. Let's have a listen, though, to our own Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, speaking yesterday about the plans.
We will now move into an operational phase. Our militaries will meet on Thursday this week here in the United Kingdom to put strong and robust plans in place to swing in behind a peace deal and guarantee Ukraine's future security. President Trump has offered Putin the way forward to a lasting peace. Now we must make this a reality. So this is the moment to keep driving towards the outcome that we want to see, to end the killing, a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, and lasting security for all of us.
What's fascinating about this, Robert, is I don't know what the official name for this is in psychology, apart from, well, maybe lying, because Starmer's managed to do this thing of like speaking as if him and Trump are on the same page. And they couldn't be on more different pages if they tried.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone in the British government thinks that Crimea should be just handed over to Russia when Russia took it by force. Breaking all international law, took it by force a few years ago. And I fear it won't just be Crimea. That's bad enough, by the way. The aggressor, that's Putin, is being rewarded. I'm sure that if there is a peace deal, he's going to get large sections of the east of Ukraine. Russia currently occupies a fifth of Ukraine that is just taken by force since 2022. And what I think Trump is going to do is create a peace deal where Putin is effectively allowed to keep most, if not all, of that territory. I call that a really bad deal.
I mean, it's going to be extraordinary. This is almost confirming what we had suspected, and Trump and others had been at pains to say this, not behind closed doors, but it's not going to look like it did before. What Ukraine are asking for is not going to happen. There's going to be some clearly ceding of land to Russia. This will be pivotal. This will be a deciding factor on this almost, and Putin ain't going to budge until he gets something.
And what is even worse, I think, is that there won't be that American backstop, security backstop. So Britain and France are going to have to somehow provide that security backstop to Ukraine. And we simply don't have the soldiers, we don't have the equipment, we don't have the wherewithal to do that properly. I fear for the future of Ukraine here, I really do.
And just a final point on Donald Trump about immigration, because they've got a very different immigration story to tell right now than we have. Migrant arrests in the US-Mexican border dropped by 82% since Trump's inauguration. February saw a 99% drop in the Darien Gap crossings, only 409 migrants compared to 37,000 last year. Look, I know it's early days and all the rest of it, but it looks like whatever Trump has been saying and doing seems to be working, Robert.
And on this, I applaud what Donald Trump is doing. I don't like what he's doing in Ukraine, but really like what he's doing in the border. And if we did something similar with the English Channel, not only could we stop a huge pull on the public purse of putting up all these illegal migrants in four-star hotels, but we could also save lives in the Channel. And that's the thing I bang on and on about.
Yep.
We welcome in the migrants. We encourage them to take that ridiculous journey on pathetic boats, and hundreds of them end up drowning. That we could stop if we were just tougher like Donald Trump is.
Robert, always great to gauge your views on the big stories. Thank you as ever. Here's Robert Taylor, the journalist and political commentator. Thank you to him. Over to you shortly. We're also going to be joined by Edmund Gemmell. He's the leader of the Climate Party. I don't imagine he's going to be breaking bread with Kemi Badenoch anytime soon. And Ben Pyle is co-founder of Climate Debate UK, who has a very different view, but will he encourage and be encouraged by the Conservative position on this now? We'll have more of that, and of course, crucially, your comments too. 0344 499 1000. Can the Tories now lead the way on the net zero debate? That and more on its way. Just gone 1:30. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Comes in from Alan, who says the net zero deception has been known for many years. Jumping in on the green bandwagon, a power grab by governments to exert control over the public. It's easy for opposition parties to make statements, but I don't trust any politician, especially when they get into power. You know, it's strange. I was thinking about this morning, listening to politicians of all different hues and colours and parties and the like. They're such a curious bunch of people, of whatever party. They're all a bit weird, and your disposition should be one of not to really trust any, which is why I almost lose the will to live when I see a sort of a hero worship of a politician or a party. And that's just mental. And again, when you have a derangement syndrome, as we see as well, that's also a bit weird. But I think that the healthy disposition is to say my starting point for any politician is that I'm not going to trust them. Kemi Badenoch, however, wants your trust. She's slammed the UK's 2050 net zero target as impossible, warning that it will harm living standards and even, she says, bankrupt the country. She's criticised the reliance on China for green energy components and said that heat pump targets are unachievable at the current rate. She also claims the 2019 net zero law was rushed through without proper scrutiny. Let's have a listen to what the Tory leader had to say.
Net zero by 2050 is impossible. I don't say that with pleasure. I want a better future and a better environment for our children, but we have to get real. Anyone who has done any serious analysis knows it cannot be achieved without a significant drop in our living standards, or worse, by bankrupting us.
So these are strong words, a real departure from the party's previous policy and what you could argue, the groupthink policy of the entirety of Westminster, bar a few notable exceptions. In a moment, Ben Pyle joins us. First, Edmund Gemmell, leader of the Climate Party. I'm assuming she's not going to get your vote on this one, Edmund, anytime soon, but she does say there quite openly, and this I would assume is now Tory policy, that it's not achievable and it's going to bankrupt us anyway. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Yes, I mean, absolutely appalled by what I heard from her, actually. And it's also dismayed at the way she phrased it. I mean, she talks about net zero as potentially bankrupting us, when at the moment we already have a net debt that's as big as our GDP. We have the Office of Budget Responsibility saying that the way we're going at the moment, it's going to triple over the next 50 years and potentially go up to 6 times if we don't achieve a productivity growth of 1.5%. And we're paying £8 billion a month interest on our national debt. I don't know what the definition of bankruptcy is, but I suppose when you can keep functioning in some way, you're not bankrupt. But right now, we're in a serious financial hole.
How is it going to... That's the point I think she's recognising, isn't it? Like, you throw net zero in, it gets even worse because it's incredibly expensive. Heating our homes and just being able to cook a meal, put the fire on, is impossible for some people. We've got the highest energy on the planet at the moment.
Well... there are reasons for that. And I think let's talk briefly about energy price, then come to Kemi and those comments which are related to what you just said. Our energy price, price of electricity is going up at the moment because of the price of gas, because partly the system where we have it, the last unit of wholesale gas or energy that's used to make our electricity is the price we then pay. And that's forcing the price up. And that's because of the war in Ukraine and instability on the gas markets. And if we didn't use any gas in the electricity system, it wouldn't be going up. Now, I think one other thing that Kemi said, and to some extent you allude to now, is the danger that comes from what we're doing at the moment, where we've outsourced all the opportunity to China. China's making all the money for it. Because of that, we're paying out of our economy. We're continuing our trade deficit, losing money effectively to China by paying them, and we're not doing it here. Now, The Telegraph, in an article about it today, suggested that the cost of getting to net zero in 2050 was around 500 billion. Now, I'm not here to debate whether they're right or not, because I've also seen the Climate Change Committee's figures, but at 500 billion. Now, if that was concertinaed and invested in the UK over the next 5 years, would put Britain absolutely at the front of what's a new, clean industrial revolution. We led the old one, we can lead the new one. Now, if take other figures, McKinsey has done a survey of what the potential opportunity is. They've done one on AI, they've also done one on net zero when you get to 2030. And roughly speaking, the net zero economy or trade in net zero will be 12 trillion US dollars in 2030. Now, if Britain invested its 500 billion now, got the job done, wherever the money comes from, and that's partly private, of course, anyway, got the job done, how much of that 12 trillion would we steal in 2031 by being the only major economy that's got there? And at that point, energy prices going down, more money in our pocket, a growth of GDP.
Why are we chasing it though? And I don't. Why are we chasing this thing? For what purpose?
I think for me, it's chasing the industrial opportunity. There are only two major industrial opportunities, two mega trends in the world at the moment. It's AI and it's decarbonisation or sustainability. However you phrase it up, they're directions that everybody's going in, and they've signed up in different ways. And although things are bumpy, in all cases, things will go up and down to some extent on our way there. That's a direction of travel. And that's a vast amount of opportunity for a major economy that gets there first. And in Britain, neither Kemi Badenoch and the Conservatives, nor Labour, nor in fact Reform, have any industrial strategy. All they're doing is picking away at the scabs and trying to reverse us. They're trying to get us to not do stuff that at the moment we're very slightly ahead of the rest of the world on. Now, I'm not saying we're doing it fast enough. We're not. We should invest heavily, see this as a major industrial opportunity that we can win and get there and make money for Britain.
Make money for Britain. So there is money in them there green hills. Ed, thank you very much indeed. Edmund Gemmell, leader of the Climate Party. Let's speak to Ben Pyle, co-founder of Climate Debate UK. Listen, anything you've ever written about this, Ben, ignore it, rip it up, start again, because you just had the lesson there. There's money in those hills. Go for the money, become world leaders. What's not to like? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Well, yeah, I mean, Ed's desire to save the planet is a noble one, but we have to ask what planet it is he's living on that he wants to save, because I don't recognise very much of what he said. We've had 25 years of the experiments with renewable energy policy. We've invested many, many billions of pounds, as have other European countries, and we support renewable energy generation. I think up to 50% of companies' revenue comes from subsidies, but we're failing with that. Those policies have very clearly failed. And it's even obvious now to people in Westminster that this cannot continue. I think we've just seen this week in Germany, when subsidies are pulled from wind farms, they're decommissioned because they're no longer economically sustainable. They're unable to stand on their own 2 feet. And the same is true of our experiments with green energy. Over the 25 years that we've been supporting green generation and other green companies, our energy prices have tripled, and we are deindustrializing. And we're putting more and more of our industries at risk of closure, and more of them have just sort of upped and off. And that's all been to the benefit of producers, factories in the East. And I don't see any recognition that that's from the likes of Ed or from most politicians in Westminster, that's a result of the policies that we've had. And I'm glad, so at last, that someone in Westminster is sort of really trying to put energy realism at the heart of this. But I think what you said at the beginning of this section was really important, that we've got to be slightly suspicious of this, because the Tory party have had reviews into net zero before. Under Liz Truss, she commissioned a study into net zero policies, but unfortunately the person she asked to survey net zero policies was the very person who instigated them. Chris Skidmore. He was the minister who introduced net zero to Parliament and then effectively signed that into law, as people point out. And then the following government, Rishi Sunak's government, started to realise that many of the sales mandates for EVs, for example, were unsustainable, weren't going to work, were going to really annoy voters and put huge costs onto people. So they started to relax the her mandates on the abolition of domestic gas boilers and EVs. So we've had these kind of reviews before, and the danger is that what will happen is that it will get lost in the weeds, and it will just be turn into an attempt to save what is salvageable from net zero. And I don't see any concrete plans from Kemi Badenoch yet. I live in hope that this is going to be a thoroughgoing examination of the failures that we've been pointing out. Many people have been pointing out for 20 years. Yeah. It's taken Westminster 20 years to start asking the questions that were being put to them 20 years ago.
And it seems to me, I mentioned that word groupthink, and I absolutely believe, Ben, that is precisely what is going on over there in Parliament and among the kind of intelligentsia of political thinking the world over, pretty much the world over, where it's a bit like the way the question is sort of phrased, you know, do you want a cleaner world? It's a bit like asking, do you want to get rid of racism? Well, everybody would go, of course we want to get rid of racism. And I think the same kind of, almost the same neurological kind of journey happens in the heads of these people. It's like, yeah, because if I say no, I'm going to look like some kind of like weirdo with the climate thing, so I better join in on this. Don't know anything about it at all, and half of these people couldn't write 2 sentences on this policy if you gave them all the time in the world. So it's kind of as if we've sort of reached this peculiar place where everybody has been collared in this pincer movement by this term net zero and cleaner plant and all the rest of it, spectacularly forgetting, and I tried to loosely mention this with Ed a second ago, the expense of it. They want me to buy a new car, they want me to rip out my boiler, they want me to stop going on holiday, they want me to do, I mean, the list, my food is costing a fortune, I mean, the list goes on. And yet the argument that comes back is, well, don't worry, because eventually it's going to be cheaper.
Yeah, well, if we go back 20 years, the problem began then. I don't know if you remember, but in 2006 or so, David Cameron decided to rebrand the party, and that was in response to, in fact, Theresa May's claim that it was the nasty party. The Tories were the nasty party, and he chose a tree to represent a green tree, and he commissioned John Gummer. If you remember him, the Environment Secretary, who's now restyled as Lord Debon, and Zach Goldsmith to reformulate Conservative Party doctrine and to bring the green stuff into it. And then he even sort of did press releases on the rooftop of Greenpeace's London HQ, saying how great renewable energy is. And so, and at the time, they were in quite an arms race with the Labour Party to be the champions of the green agenda and the climate agenda. So the Labour government at the time wanted a 60% reduction in CO2 emissions, and the Tories said it should be 80%. And then the Lib Democrats said that it should be 100%. This was net zero. This is back in 2006, 7 and 8. So groupthink was really established in Parliament 20 years ago. And I think that's what Kemi Badenoch, as you point out, that's what Kemi Badenoch really should be pointing out. We've been let down by all of our MPs and all of the political parties in Westminster, all of the parties of government for that entire duration. So she needs to explain, how was it possible for a very weird ideological movement to dominate Westminster at our expense and to undermine democracy and realism in policy making decisions.
Indeed, and I thought the most powerful point, assuming she keeps to this and doesn't get one of the investigators in again to reverse it all, when she said this: a multi-trillion-pound 30-year project touching every single aspects of our lives was decided in 90 minutes without a single vote. I mean, that should be, sentence should be taught in schools for years to come. A very powerful point that something as seismic as this, game-changing as this, expensive as this, was decided in that manner. Extraordinary.
Well, the Net Zero was an amendment to the Climate Change Act. So the Climate Change Act was decided in 2008. And I think only 5 MPs ultimately sort of dissented from that decision. So they said no, in the final vote. And it only takes 90 minutes if there are no objections for a statutory instrument to amend primary legislation. right? That was all the thought that was given to it, and MPs just really decided, but back in 2008, that deciding how to get to net zero or how to get to the 80% wasn't really any of their business. So they set up the Climate Change Committee, the CCC, in order to be able to make those kind of decisions, to tell Parliament what carbon budget should be for each 5-year section between 2008 and 2050. But that left Parliament or governments with no idea about how they were going to achieve that. Yeah. So essentially, Parliament has hollowed itself out and reduced its power, and gave that power to quangos and weirdo green organisations and slightly crazy green academics, a number of research organisations, and many of these organisations turn out in turn to have been funded by interests that were going to profit from green policies. I mean, I won't get into weeds on all that now, but we've not really been represented. No consumers' interests, no households' interests, no industry's interests have been represented during that time. Because MPs were terrified, if there were any who were even aware of our criticism, of coming forward and making those statements. That's the scandal. That really needs to be pointed out.
100%. Listen, Ben, great to have you on. Thank you, Ben Pyle, co-founder of Climate Debate UK. The other voice you heard there was Edwin Gemmell, who's saying, look, we can be right ahead of the game. If we get this right, we're going to be leading the way on this new industrial revolution, selling stuff, employing folk, manufacturing, the windmills will turn, our energy will be free and clean, life's going to be beautiful in this new utopia. That's broad. I don't think I'm misrepresenting his point. Ben Pyle saying, well, hang on a second. Yeah, that's probably not going to happen, and B, even if it did, it's going to cost a shed load of money to get there. 0344 499 1000.
Here's the thing, he says, Farage is incapable of saving the UK. In office, he would do massive damage. We love our country. We'll fight on. Are you incapable of saving the UK, and would you do massive damage in office?
Is this the same Ben Habib who lost election after election? Is this the same Ben Habib who, when he was deputy leader of the party, failed to get any of the candidates vetted, which caused us such problems at the general election, and failed to get us to stand in more than 12% of seats last year? Is that the same fella?
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one in from Chris, who says, I'm not especially intelligent, not 1 O level or A level. I once got a first, though, in woodwork, but even I could see years ago that net zero and man-made climate change is a nonsense. Why would I trust Kemi or any other politician not to muck up the future? But I will trust Reform because they've been saying this stuff for years. And that's going to be interesting. She's trying to park her tanks on Nigel Farage's lawn on this one. But, of course, love or hate Farage and Reform, they're well ahead of the game on this. They didn't buy it in the first place. Over to your calls. Paul is in Cardiff. What have you got for us, Paul? Can the Tories lead the way on this now?
Hello, Ian.
Hi.
I know you're supposed to have a neutral view on it.
Well, sort of.
Yeah. But it's never ever going to happen, net zero. And just suppose, for argument's sake, it did happen. Who's going to stop all the other countries with all their pollution in the air?
Mm.
And I think that there's people making money, they're on the gravy train out of this net zero.
Well, it's got to be all countries or none, right? I mean,
yeah.
You can't even have one, like, dropping off. You've got to have all or nothing.
Yeah.
It is said that China are actually doing more than anyone else in the world, while simultaneously polluting more than anyone else in the world. Can't quite square the circle, but that appears to be the kind of press release line these days.
Yeah. But, and the money that's going to be, it's just mind-blowing.
I mean, the money involved in this is absolutely huge. I don't have a problem with somebody discovering free energy. I think we'd all like a bit of that. But I think to get to free energy, it's going to cost you multi-trillions of pounds first to hopefully one day to reach this kind of utopian goal of the windmills turning and the sun shining and our homes are beautifully fueled and nothing is damaged or there's no carbon footprint involved. I just don't fully see it. Paul, thank you for starting us off on this. Rob's in Portsmouth. Same point, Rob. Can the Tories now lead the way on this? Can they claim this as their new territory?
I don't think so. And when I spoke to your producer, I said I expect your guests are going to say much more than I can. And just having listened to Ben, he's probably stolen my thunder. But my point was basically, I think we've just been strung along. Mm-hmm. And I always talk about the net zero. I thought it came in 2015, but apparently it came, or the net zero targets, from what Ben was saying, came in before that. But in 2015, there was the Cook report, which was like a massive evaluation of all the climate scientists' reports. And they basically asked two questions. You know, is global warming happening? And the majority said yes. Is it man-made? And the majority said no. But a slight criticism of the media and everyone, no one mentions that. So it's almost like a massive lie that the public have been fed. But everyone's seen how universities...
well, it's the ultimate in socialist thinking. You know, to have pure socialism, you have to have an enemy, right? Otherwise, it falls. There's got to be an enemy. Usually, the enemy is the right-wingers. But what greater enemy could you have than the destruction of the planet? I mean, those to argue against, you know, and be in favour. You have to perpetually feel as if you're doing something that's going to compound and confirm your credentials as a nice person and wanting to save the planet and all the animals and the lovely flowers. It doesn't get any better than that. It's irresistible.
No, and actually just listening to this debate, I've just suddenly thought, you know, trees love carbon. Trees love carbon.
Love a bit of carbon.
They turn it into oxygen and but they produce a bit of moisture that cools the planet. And I think I must have been a bit of a hippie when I was a school kid because we had a campaign in 1973, which was plant a tree in 73, plant another in 70. No, hang on, that's not the rhyme. Plant a tree in 73, plant another in 74. And all this carbon capture by the Labour Party, I can't remember how many billion they spent, but just plant a tree.
Just plant a tree, you see, that's all it is. Rob, I'm glad you planted the tree, Rob, but my life has vastly improved as a result of your tree planting proclivities, frankly. I've got to move, Rob, no other reason than time. Thank you for that. Plant a tree in 73. I see what they did there. More from you. Can the Tories lead the way on this net zero argument? Has Kemi Badenoch drawn a big fat red line on this one? Lines are open. On talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
You better believe it. 3 minutes coming up on 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome back to the home of common sense. Lots to get through. We are talking, of course, Kemi Badenoch saying that hitting net zero by 2050 is impossible. This is a bigger statement than you might first realise. A complete departure, not just from the remainder of Parliament, pretty much, who have all got a kind of groupthink going on this, but from her own party. They, of course, were the instigators of this timetable. She argues that achieving this whole idea would be lowering living standards, or even worse, bankrupting the entire country. Do you support Badenoch on this? Can the Tories now lead the way on the climate change debate? We'll have more calls and comments from you shortly. We'll also talk to Callum Price in just a couple of moments. Also this afternoon, Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall has announced sweeping changes to the welfare system. They want to save £5 billion by 2030, arguing that the current support is failing the very people it's supposed to help, and it's holding our country back. Newsflash, this ain't going to touch the sides. We'll have more details. Our ministers have resorted to using police cells for prisoners because jails are overcrowding again, with the plan to free up 200 spaces costing £688 per prisoner per day. Oh, but is there anything in this country that actually works? For goodness sake. 0344 499 1000. Ash in Lancs says, on the Labour Party with the welfare statement are actually committing suicide as a party of government. If they took time out to look into the mirror, they would see clearly they are actually leaning heavily to the right of politics. Yeah, I think they know that, much to this disgruntlement of people in their own party. Will it make any difference? John says CO2 is invisible, has no smell, has no taste, so convenient for green energy fraudsters, says John. And this one from Anthony in Selby. As 63 years of age, at 63 years of age, net zero meant that for the last 2 winters I've only been able to afford to turn on my heat just 1 hour a day. I simply will not survive this policy. Anthony, thank you. And you've got to get your heat pump in there, of course, fairly soon, plus a windmill on your roof, or maybe in the garden, and some solar panels on the roof. Get the car turned to electric, change what you eat, which will be slightly more expensive. Once you've done all of that, then you can turn the heating on, Anthony. Thank you for that. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Callum Price, Director of Communications at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Callum, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. How are you doing?
Very well. I mean, we'll come to the Badenoch comments in just a couple of moments. But first, let's look at that news in the last hour coming out of Parliament. Kendall unveiling the crackdown on benefits, aiming to save $5 billion by 2030. Of course, the problem with these numbers is that by the time you get to 2030, the $5 million will be eaten up by a greater increase in those requiring the benefits. Hence, nothing changes. At the very best, it's neutral.
Yeah, well, quite. Look, it's a step in the right direction, I think. They're looking at the huge proliferation in health and disability benefits that there's been since the pandemic, which has been vast and rapid, and trying to sort of raise the bar to eligibility for these benefits and bring some of them down. But if you look at the numbers, $5 billion it seems significant. It certainly will probably help the Chancellor hit her self-imposed fiscal targets for the spring statement. But actually, when compared to the national debt, which is 100% of GDP, so that's a couple of trillion, 100 billion we spend a year on just servicing that debt, just paying the interest. This is the scale of the fiscal problem that the United Kingdom has. So 5 billion probably isn't far enough, frankly. Now, you will never find all of that money from the welfare budget, nor should you. And the government is rightly saying that they want to focus the benefits on those who desperately need them most. That is absolutely right. But there has to be more questions asked about what more the government should be doing.
It's the ongoing cul-de-sac Gordian knot, isn't it, of politics, how to save money in such an area. Very sensitive, of course, because the minute you start talking about people who are on certain benefits, incapacity and the like, you are talking about disability, and campaigners understandably perhaps say, oh, great, of all the things you could save money on, you're going for people in wheelchairs, for God's sake.
Well, exactly. And I mean, it's certainly not easy. And there's a reason why there's been sort of a fermenting rebellion on the backbenches and within Cabinet about it, which is why they haven't maybe got as far as they maybe were originally planning to. But the problem is that the welfare budget is absolutely vast. It's one of the largest areas of government expenditure. Alongside pensions and healthcare. So the fact of the matter is they need to look across the board at all spending on everything to see what the government should be doing. And the direction of this bill is only going up and exponentially. It's the health and disability benefits have increased to 25% since the pandemic. To 65 billion. That's what we're playing about now, and they're forecast to increase without changes to 100 billion by the end of this Parliament. It's just not sustainable. You have to look at what the government can actually afford to do before we start talking about what we would like it to do, and that's the harsh reality. Now, they can make improvements by focusing it on the people that should need them the most, and by helping people to get back into work. They're talking a good game about that. But when you look at what they're talking about, they might chuck up 1 billion at sort of employment support, but then they are making it much, much harder for businesses, much more expensive for businesses to hire people by raising national insurance contributions, by raising the minimum wage, by equalising the minimum wage for young people. And then their employment rights bill will make it much harder to hire and fire as well. So on one side of the ledger, they're making the right noises, but on the other, it's a level of doublespeak, I think.
It's 100% that, isn't it? And you are forced to kind of, every now and again, it's the sort of area you don't want to peep into too deeply. But if you look at welfare and the increasing costs of that, whatever they do, you know, as you say, 5 billion quid, great if they can save money in all the right areas. Simultaneously, that bill is set to go through the roof anyway, and various other elements of welfare. Look at the NHS, take obesity alone. Diabetes could bankrupt our health system single-handedly. So between those two massive areas, dwarfing anything else around it, from defence to education, etc., the direction of travel is, I mean, it's breathtakingly disturbing to look at where we're going to be in a decade.
Yeah, it really is. And then add on to that, the other massive one is the pensions problem and the sort of unfunded liabilities that we basically have in our pension system at the moment, and an increasingly ageing population, which will only put more stress on both the health budget and the pensions budget. This comes back to what I just said about we just have to work out exactly what the country can afford, and how we fix it. At the minute, there's 9 million people who are economically inactive. There's only 27 million people working in the private sector, and then once you add on all the people that are in the state sector and all the people who are pensioners, the burden on those people working is unfathomable and growing ever still. So then, when you're adding taxes on businesses on top of that, it's a bit of a doom loop, to be frank.
Yeah. Well, maybe Kemi Badenoch is going to help ease some of the pressure. To sort of paraphrase her point, net zero is dangerous and it's too expensive. It could bankrupt us. That would address some of the issue based on her argument that we will see a significant drop in living standards and we'll be out of cash. It's not sustainable. 2050 is unrealistic. The heat pump target, as one example, is unrealistic. She says she never fully supported it at the time, and although she believes in addressing climate change, doesn't think this is the way forward.
Yeah, I think this is the right move. She's doing what she said she was going to do, which is tell the truth. And this is one of those areas where net zero polls quite well when you ask people about it, because people care about the environment, and rightly. But when this starts touching people's lives in the way that it has and will do increasingly so, people will quite rightly start asking questions about why we are imposing this deadline on ourselves. I think it is the argument for net zero by 2050 was obviously always about reducing emissions, but when you look at our emissions globally, it's minuscule. So the stronger argument was always about the UK playing a leadership role. If we do this as a sort of leading international nation, then others will follow. But others won't follow us if we bankrupt ourselves in the process. If we jump off a cliff and die, people won't follow us off that cliff, will they? So, so I think this is a refreshing dose of honesty from Kemi, and welcome. She is right that we can't keep subsidising to the extent that we're trying to roll out heat pumps and the like. We can't keep running simultaneous energy infrastructure when it's sunny and when it's not sunny, and we can't keep banning exploration of North Sea oil and other things like it. So there is a refreshing dose of honesty there. What we should be doing is, of course, letting the market do what it does best, which is find the most productive and efficient ways to do things. You can tax the negative externality, that is, you can tax the damage that carbon does to the environment, so that the market then adjusts and does its work instead of trying to centrally plan it all from government.
Yeah, and many people have made the not unreasonable argument, really, that you could run things in parallel, right? I mean, until you get to a stage where, you don't have to start filling, oil or chimneys up with concrete to make sure that nobody ever uses them again. Utilise what is there, bring in, if there's a cleaner form of energy and it eventually will be cheaper, I think we'd all vote for that. Of course we would. But the science, the jury is out a little bit on the efficiency of some of that. And, maybe we should run things in tandem until we can be a little more sure that we've got an alternative.
Well, that's sort of the point. We need energy, and we need cheaper energy, and we need it quicker, and to address so many of the problems that we've got, not least economic growth. Yeah. So what we should be doing is running as much cheap energy as we possibly can to help us on that front, which will in turn have a beneficial effect on the economy whirring and the innovation that comes out of that to help us get to greener, cleaner goals, because that is ultimately what we all want here. And Kemi's clear about that, as are most people, that nobody serious is questioning climate change here, and we're just questioning the sensibility of maybe imposing from government in legislation a nice round year target to hit this goal.
And finally, this one as well. I think I was about 10 when I first heard the headline, "We're running out of prison spaces." Has there ever been a time when we're not running out of prison spaces? This is the latest chapter in "We're running out of prison spaces." We're now down to using police cells. That's happened before, of course. The Justice Secretary has triggered Operation Safeguard, which means there's 200 cells available in police stations because of overcrowding jails. We're at 99% capacity. We've got 87,500 inmates. That's the highest since they had the release programme back in September. It's another utter mess. It's incredibly expensive. I don't know what's happened to building another big prison. Apparently they were building one. Did they stop? Are they still halfway through? What the heck is going on in this respect, Callum?
You're absolutely right. It's a complete mess, and it's been a mess in the making for decades, right? But so this is Operation Safeguard, where they use prison cells on a ideally this is supposed to be extremely short term. We're talking days to weeks. Yeah. I think their plan is to use it for about 8 weeks until this. So they are building this new prison, and I think it comes online, as they say, i.e. it is in use in relatively soon.
As opposed to an online prison, which would be really something else, wouldn't it?
Yes, yeah. But the issue with Operation Safeguard, well, there are multiple issues with it, but one of the more serious ones is that it takes a lot of police time. This is police who are having to run their cells in their stations like a jail. That's police officers who aren't on the streets solving crime or preventing crime even, because they're basically having to work as pseudo prison officers. So it doesn't really work for anybody. It takes cooperation from the police, which they shouldn't need to do. It's extremely expensive, and it's just another sign of our broken justice system.
There it is. Callum, thank you as ever. Callum Price, former advisor, director of communications at the Institute of Economic Affairs, with just a taster of what is happening. I mean, the prison thing is just bananas. I mean, there's a load of people that shouldn't be in the jails. I mean, the foreign prisoners, I think we should start to address that. If you commit a crime in a country, you get jailed in that country, whichever way round it is. I know that's the general rule of thumb. I think about 10% of our prison population, slightly more, are foreign nationals. You have to ask a reasonable question on that. And then there's people who just shouldn't really be in jail, people where there would be a better alternative. And I'm not talking about Dodgepot McDougal, the habitual antisocial horror show of an individual that will nick stuff, set fire to things, steal your dog, wreck your garden, all in the space of a week, and has done it multiple times. Not talking about those kind of people, but I don't know, someone who's not paid their parking fines or whatever the heck it is, those kind of crimes, and they're the people usually that you could find a non-custodial sentence for, because for many they don't give a hoot about it. There's just got to be another way. It just seems extraordinary to me that this is where we're at. We can't solve boats coming over the channel. We don't know how to lock people up because we've literally run out of prisons. I mean, seriously? Jules is in Bedford. How you doing, Jules? Back on that issue of net zero.
Hello, good afternoon. So, I'm sure you're old enough to remember, like me, when you were taught at school that the next ice age was coming. That was the consensus in the 1970s, just into the early 80s, before it started warming up and we all scared ourselves half to death that it was getting warmer.
Yeah.
But the geopolitical context to this is important. So going back 100 years or so, who won the First World War? Essentially, it was America. Once the US joined, it was only going to go one way. The same thing happened in the Second World War. Once the industrial might of the United States entered on the side against the Axis forces, that was it. We were going to win.
Yeah.
Who won the Third World War? The Third World War was called the Cold War. Ronald Reagan won that with the Star Wars program. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So every single time you have these big geopolitical face-offs, the industrial might of the USA ends up tilting the balance.
Yeah.
If you want to break that cycle of US hegemony, you have to bring about the deindustrialization of the US of A. So you have to attack the industrial base, and the best way to do that is to force it to reduce its carbon emissions. That's it. That's all you need to know.
The mood music at the moment is it ain't doing that, right?
No, it's not. No, it's not. But if we had had
and also purpose as a policy of not doing it as well.
No, for sure. But if we'd had another term of the Biden administration, their energy policy was going the same route as ours.
Yeah.
So that line of thought was winning. It's only been stopped now because the result of the US election has taken things in a completely different direction. And that's what, by the way, was given Kemi Badenoch cover to say what she said today.
You're absolutely right. That has given a cover. And of course, if the Trump administration is successful and does everything it wants to do, then the Republicans would be back in again for a fourth term. J.D. Vance would become the president as it stands. And these policies would continue, one assumes, Jules.
Absolutely. It's a racing certainty that's exactly what's going to happen. And therefore, I think we can safely say, by the time we've had this term of Trump, J.D. Vance, maybe even 2 terms of Vance, that's it. Net zero's gone.
It's gone. But, of course, in the meantime, we still have Ed Miliband. And maybe he needs to go into one of those new prison cells in a police station for a couple of years to quieten him down a bit. He's very excited about the net zero stuff.
I think the amount of hot air coming out of Ed Miliband is global warming all by itself.
Yeah, I think he is literally single-handedly responsible for the warming up of planet Earth. Listen, it's a great call, Jules. Thank you. And it's absolutely bang on that if, look, whatever China are doing, you'll be familiar with this line that, you know, forever we talked about. China are, you know, they've got 1 million coal-powered stations, more so than the rest of the planet has collectively. They're still building them, for God's sake. But simultaneously, they're also building more solar farms and turbines and God knows what else. So they've got this weird kind of a claim that they're doing less than anyone else in terms of shutting coal and fossil fuel-based factories and power stations, but they're doing more than anyone else in terms of the net zero stuff. You could call that the perfect parallel that I keep banging on about. Maybe it's as simple as that. But if America aren't on board, and India, I don't think, are really on board with this, then, you know, we never talk about Russia very much, do we? I know Russia is largely, you know, landmass and unpopulated, but it's massive still. And, you know, I would argue politically significant on this one. The last time we heard about a Russian windmill, what does that look like, a Russian windmill? Is a Russian windmill like a big windmill that when you lift it up, there's a smaller windmill underneath it and you just keep on until you eventually get to a little dinky one? Maybe that's what they are. 0344 499 1000. We'll be back with more of your calls in a couple of moments. This is Talk.
51 Act is from 1951. The world is a very different place. Immigration and refugees are very, very different from what they were then. The French Interior Minister in 2021 said to Boris Johnson, this doesn't work for either of us. We need to set up a safe and legal route. We will process these people at our shores, and if it turns out they're legitimate, they have every right to come to England because they've been cleared to be an asylum seeker. We'll do it on your behalf. Boris Johnson fell out with Emmanuel Macron that week and decided not to go to the convention that he put on for the rest of the EU leaders. This could have been solved years ago.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Debbie says, nobody should be in prison for not having a TV licence. That's very true. Is that still a thing? Does anyone go to jail these days for that? There's bound to be someone, at least one person in jail for that somewhere. I know it was once upon a time there was a horrendous, disproportionate amount of women as well in jail for that very offence, as it's still called. This in from Matty. I'm a bit confused, as on the one hand the government want to get people into work, but on the other the rise in employers' national insurance is causing small businesses to close or reduce employees. Can you make any sense of this? Great show, says Matty in Coventry. Matty, you're making a fundamental error here, of course, a massive error. I mean, it's just seismic, frankly. I'm devastated you didn't even spot it. You're forgetting who's Labour are running the country. That is why you're getting upside-down, completely muddled thoughts that are propped up by the scaffolding of their own misplaced thinking, but under scrutiny, completely collapse. It's nonsensical. You don't get growth by introducing policies that do anything but encourage growth. The grimmer reality, as far as I can see it, is that I can't see how any of this picture gets better anytime soon, because we're skint. And you know, countries never work really on some, you can educate me otherwise, on some generous surplus that is always swilling around in the pot. And you know, prime ministers can lay in a bath, showering themselves in pound notes. I mean, that, I don't think we're ever there. You're always in a bit of debt somewhere. But it's seismic, and every bit of projection based on all sorts, from people becoming more unable to work for a variety of issues. The issue of an older population is another factor in all of this as well. I mean, we are absolutely up the what's it without a thingy at the moment. This is Malcolm in Warrington. How you doing, Malcolm? On benefits.
Hi, Ian. Thanks for taking me call.
It's a pleasure.
It's an absolute nightmare listening to Talk TV, because every time someone comes on there, pensioners are costing the system an absolute fortune. What they forget is that pensioners are paid in all their lives and they're entitled to something. But no one ever says that. People that never work, how can they get on sickness benefits without working?
Yeah.
It's just, I'm 70 years old. Me and my wife, we own our own house.
Yep.
With no kids, and we manage on £460 between us a week, which is less than £23,000 a year.
Are you able to manage on that?
Well, you've no choice, do you?
Yeah.
Because they won't give you nothing else.
Yeah.
And I suspect that people on sickness benefit, PPI, get a lot more. They don't own a house, council tax, don't pay any bills, and it's just absolutely disgusting that you listen all the time.
Yeah.
The pensioners are costing the system. We're not. We paid in for.
You paid in forever. I mean, listen to this, Malcolm. This is a message that came in from Chloe in Hampshire, who says the optics are terrible. We've got Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, spending £250,000 of taxpayers' money on travel and luxury hotels, a security pass for a mate, and £36,000 on a Westminster self-portrait. And that's just one example, Malcolm, of the kind of stuff that's going on. And then you tell me a story like that, where you've paid into the system for decades and decades. So both of you have. And there you are, trying to get by on 400 quid.
Yeah, never claim benefits when entitled to nothing.
Yeah.
Pension credits, it doesn't matter because if you're a couple of pound over the minimum, you don't get anything there. And oh no, simple. It just really annoys me when you hear people saying it's pensioners costing the system. They paid it all their lives, and I just wanted to make the point to you. And hopefully all your
I get it, listen, and you've made it brilliantly, and I'm sorry that, you know, this in the winter of your life, you end up in this very situation, and then having to hear people say, well, it's the pensioners, isn't it? Goodness me. Malcolm in Warrington, thank you very much indeed for that. One here from Alan, who says, I'm probably being thick, but how is our investment in net zero going to be recouped by being ahead of the game? Whatever we develop will be copied by China and then probably be improved. They will then undercut us due to their low wage and lack of employment laws. I've never experienced such a pathetic bunch of politicians as we have now. Sadly, I fear for the future of the country. I mean, this idea that we are somehow, as was advanced by our first guest, we're ahead of some kind of game here. We could be ahead of the revolution on net zero. What is it we're meant to be inventing? The solar panels and the turbines already don't come from here. They're made usually in, well, what's that country called? Oh, what's it? It's on the China. That's it. Yeah, China are usually and are already churning these things out by the million a week. So what's the game we're going to be ahead of, that we stand up and go, we're an example to the world? You have to bear in mind, by the way, most other countries are also doing this. I know China, the United States, India, and a few others are not quite so on board. But broadly speaking, every other country is doing this and will probably be claiming that they're ahead of the game. I'm sure the Germans, if the Chancellor stood up when he's not trying to count how many Deutschmarks they have left, which isn't very much, I'm sure he would say, oh yeah, but at least we're ahead of the game on net zero, because so, you know, other countries will be copying our technology. What is this technology they're going to be copying? What specifically is it that's going to make us all rich? That seems to be the basis of the sell. I mean, this is sort of emperor's new clothes, and then some, right? 0344 499 1000. We'll be back with more from you coming next on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, just gone 25 to 2. So, sweeping changes, a lovely Westminster phrase, isn't it? Some sweeping changes to the welfare system have been unveiled as the government aims to cut 5 billion. Rumours that it was going to be 6 billion, but hey, what's a billion matter? It's going to be 5 billion by 2030. The Work and Pension Secretary plans to scrap work capability assessments and merge certain benefits, calling the current system complex and holding our country back, says Liz Kendall. Personal independent payments will stay in place following criticism from Labour MPs. Let's have a listen to Liz Kendall in action. In fact, we will come to that clip shortly. In a moment, we'll be joined by Tom Pollard, former DWP advisor and head of social policy at the New Economics Foundation. But first, Damien Green, former Conservative MP, former Deputy Prime Minister and Cabinet Minister and Chair of Social Care UK. That's a heck of a CV you've got there these days, Damien. Nice to speak to you again, by the way. You should stick that on LinkedIn. That's what every politician apparently now does, with varying results, it seems.
You also missed out the one perhaps most relevant piece of my CV for this interview, which is that I was a Secretary of State for Work and Pensions.
Absolutely right.
I have grappled with these problems.
Yeah, and my local MP, of course, I should say. You know, we can't forget that.
Most importantly of all.
That's the most important thing of all. Listen, I mean, every government has wrestled with this one, haven't they? They've all given it a go and tried to find a way around the ever-growing, spiralling cost of welfare. Is this tinkering with the system, or is this seismic enough to solve a problem?
It's not seismic enough. I mean, you're right that all of us who've been in that department knows that it spends a significant proportion of our national wealth, and therefore you want that money to be spent as efficiently and fairly as possible. And the root problem is always that there are people who desperately deserve and need these benefits, and there are others who are trying to play the system. And weeding out the latter is one of the key unpleasant jobs that the Department for Work and Pensions has to do. But in direct answer to your question, I think that for the amount of political flack that the government is getting from its own left wing and from many of the charities and pressure groups that deal in this area, actually saving £5 billion is a fairly small amount out of the welfare bill, and a fairly small amount of what Rachel Reeves needs to find because she's slowed the economy down so much.
And of course, I suppose the reality, the irredeemable reality, Damien, is that even if you were able to address all forms of fraud or claims that were inaccurate or overpaid or whatever, even if you did that, we are still left with the stark fact that this is a growing problem. We have more people making claims. We have a growing elderly population, if you want to factor that in as well. I mean, this story isn't going in reverse gear. The overarching figures as we move into the next decade are going to dwarf what we're spending now in this.
Yeah, you can't change the demographics. We will be an older society, and that's good. That means because we're all living longer. But what you can do is make sure that of the working age population, more of them are actually at work, and that is the eternal battle inside the DWP. And I think that some of the things Liz Kendall has announced today, if they work, great. Helping people back into work or helping people into work for the first time is good. The big change since I was Secretary of State has been what's happened since COVID, when there's been a massive increase in the number of people who are of working age and who don't declare themselves unemployed, have just taken themselves out of the labour market altogether. And in particular, those who are saying they've got mental health issues for doing that. And that's something that hasn't happened in other countries that had lockdowns as well. So I think that's where you would laser focus any attempt to solve this as to why do we have this apparent massive, terrible epidemic of growth in mental health problems.
It's often said on the, I mean, that is absolutely the biggest conundrum perhaps for ministers and civil servants in that department as to how they begin to solve this. You can't tell somebody that they don't have a mental health problem, and it's some would suggest unfairly compared it to the bad back problem, which you can't disprove, etc. I mean, is that fair to say that? I mean, nobody wants to have a pop at somebody who's got bipolar or something.
No, absolutely, and yeah, I think we all reasonably would agree that there are some people who've got genuine problems and they need addressing, and there are things we can do inside the health service to make sure they get diagnosed and treated earlier and all of that. But nevertheless, I think it's hard to avoid the conclusion that there are some people who are looking to claim benefits to which they're not, frankly, entitled. Yeah. And that is where the rubber hits the road. That's where an individual assessor has to say, look, you're not entitled to this payment, whether it's a work-related benefit or personal independent payments, the PIPs that people are talking about. And that's always difficult. And one of the things that the government has done that will, I suspect, cause the most political trouble is to say they're actually going to reduce the benefits of what will be large numbers, many thousands of people currently receiving PIP, to save this money. And it's always easier not to give people benefits than to say you've had this benefit in the past and we're now taking it away. And that's where they seem to be trying to find the savings. And so when I think people delve into the details of what Liz Kendall announced earlier today, that will be the most controversial part. And that will be the part where you really do have to justify it in great detail about why, if you've got a certain type of condition or set of conditions, you're still not entitled to these benefits.
Just a final point, David. Is it true? We often hear people say, yeah, OK, some money is taken in fraud, but actually the biggest problem is people who underclaim. Is that, I mean, you would have heard that when you were at the DWP. Is that true? The underclaiming is, something that runs into hundreds of millions of pounds, if the truth be known.
It's a different part of the welfare budget. The biggest underclaiming is pension credit, which is money given to old age pensioners, obviously state pensioners, who can't live. It's accepted that you can't live only on the basic pension. Yeah. Most people these days have some kind of private pension, but those who can't get pension credit. And a lot of people, particularly older people, by which I mean they're not just coming up into their late 60s and therefore entitled, but actually late 70s, 80 plus, are of the generation that say, I don't want to be dependent on the state, so they don't claim something that they regard as a benefit. And ironically, those are some of the people who I think nobody would resent getting more money. But that doesn't, it applies much less in the field of work benefits or the disability benefits that are the centrepiece of what she's talking about today.
Damien, thank you, as ever. Damien Green, former Tory MP, former Deputy Prime Minister, and of course former Secretary of State at the DWP as well. We're going to talk to Tom Pollard in just 1 second, former advisor over there at the Department for Work and Pensions. Let's just have a listen then to that clip. We have it now. This is Liz Kendall talking earlier about the system.
That there will always be people who can never work because of the severity of their disability or illness. Under this government, the social security system will always be there for people in genuine need. That is a principle we will never compromise on. Yeah. But disabled people and people with health conditions who can work should have the same rights, choices and chances to work as everybody else. Yeah. That principle of equality is vital too, because far from what members opposite would have you believe, many sick and disabled people want to work with the right help and support. And unlike the Conservatives, that is what we will deliver.
Well, a bit of party divide there at the end. Tom Pollard is a former advisor in that very department. I'm sure there's a lot that Damien said, some that you agree with. I mean, it's the department where you go to work to knock your head against a brick wall, somebody said to me once.
Well, I actually spent a part of my time at the department when Damien was Secretary of State, and yeah, I do have to say I found him a bit more receptive and open-minded than some others that I worked with. But it is a frustrating department because it is a huge hulking place, and it is trying to do a very difficult job. I guess what I'm concerned about today is that, you know, I think there's kind of a fundamental tension at the heart of what's being spoken about. On the one hand, there's talk about providing better employment support, investing in that, trying to de-risk the journey back into work. But the government's trying to sort of fudge that together with a narrative about cuts. And actually, I think those cuts are kind of in fundamental tension with the more positive agenda the department is trying to pursue. And for most people, having a cut in their income is not going to help them return to work. If anything, it's going to have the opposite effect.
There's no, again, and perhaps another cliche about the Department of Work and Pensions, but there's no, it's often said you're never going to please everybody. We know that with any kind of policy in any department. But this one is very tricky. It was tricky for lots of different reasons. There's so many tentacles to the department. Yes, you need to say, you know, you have a public duty as a government to make sure money is spent efficiently, it's going to the right places. Somebody said to me quite recently that the reality is most of the time it is going to the right places. I mean, 99% of the time it really does go to the right place. It's quite hard to get like loads of benefits these days just by lying on a form. It doesn't, you know, I'm sure there's a couple of cases somewhere where, you know, Bob in Arbroath, apologies to Bob in Arbroath, by the way, has, you know, somehow trousered a few quid that he shouldn't have had. But generally speaking, it is, the reality, it's an expensive part of the budget, right? I mean, it's massive and it's growing, and it's that last point that causes governments the real problem, because this doesn't get any, the optics, if that is the game that governments need to keep their eye on, are never going to get any better.
Yeah, well, I mean, Ian, that's incredibly refreshing to hear, because so much coverage around this topic kind of obsessively focuses on this idea that there is a large proportion of people who are somehow getting stuff they're not entitled to. And as well as having been an advisor at the department and now working for the New Economics Foundation, I also do some frontline work as an NHS mental health social worker. And it is not an easy process for people to go through, particularly people with mental health problems. It is quite daunting and challenging. And understandably, once people get that additional support, they are wary then about the risk that it gets taken away. And that's where we see a lot of the problems around people returning to work. But the idea that the way you fix that is by cutting that support, I just think is nonsensical. And actually, what's so disappointing today is that we did see quite a positive agenda set out by the government last year, that we're talking about trying to foster kind of genuine engagement with people and help them towards good work. But now we're seeing, you know, threats of reductions to benefits, threats of applying stricter conditions to people on these benefits. And actually, in all my experience of working on these issues over the last, 10, 15 years, those measures, designed to achieve short-term savings, tend to produce poorer long-term outcomes and actually don't achieve sustainable savings, because as we've seen, people just kind of move into different parts of the system, continue to struggle with their health, continue to need other support from elsewhere, from the state. And we just have to get honest about the scale of the challenge we're facing.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that ultimately what it comes down to? Or were there areas when you worked in that department, and even now with the work you do, Tom, do you ever think, okay, there could be money saved, and it's not there, it's actually over here? I mean, is there this sort of magic corridor that you could go down and go, wow, look, here it is. This is where they keep the vol-au-vents and the gold bars. I mean, this is where we need to really save some money. Forget people in wheelchairs and those with mental health conditions. Most civilised people want to help that group, but there's this area here. Did you ever identify anywhere that looked like a royal waste of taxpayers' money?
Well, I guess the thing that was frustrating for me, mostly working on stuff around mental health and disability, was that I do think there's a real opportunity to support many more people back into work. You know, I work with people with even quite severe mental health conditions who want to work, as the Secretary of State said today. But what I think is fundamentally misleading and kind of locked into DWP thinking is this idea that if someone can't be mandated to turn up at the job centre under the threat of sanctions, that somehow they're locked out of receiving support. And actually, there's lots that could be done to engage people voluntarily with support. And part of what will help a lot of people is feeling confident that they have enough to live off, and that they will be supported back to work and they won't suddenly have those benefits taken away. So creating kind of insecurity and requiring people to kind of attend appointments under the threat of sanctions is exactly the wrong way to go. But I just think it's kind of woven into the department's DNA to some extent.
Yeah, and this is a department that, according to the Daily Mail, is crammed with sizzling lefties who want to give away everybody's money. So you don't recognise that interpretation of civil service over there at the DWP.
Well, I worked with lots of people who were very well-intentioned and wanted to support people. I think there is a real problem where, you know, if you fundamentally tie up employment support and helping people back to work with a department that's also under pressure to achieve savings on benefits, you end up with poor outcomes because achieving those short-term savings to benefits is not the same as supporting people into work, and actually often those things are in direct tension.
Yeah. What about that mental health point? It's a controversial area in lots, not just in this department, but in lots of areas of life. You know, what is a mental health issue? And we know that, you know, thank goodness we talk about this stuff years ago. You often look back at when I say our forefathers, I mean quite recently over the decades, people who went to work all their life and were struggling enormously with no kind of help, couldn't even talk about it, especially as a bloke, you know, even less chance of talking about it because you'd have been laughed out the room. Somebody had thought there was something wrong with you. So thankfully we take this stuff seriously. We are often told that the negative upshot of that is that, you know, claiming you have a mental health issue when you might just have some anxiety or stress is where the problem is. It's finding this line between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a legitimate discussion to be had about how we understand and respond to mental health problems. I don't think people are getting these benefits because they feel a bit stressed or have a little bit of anxiety. And I think that often gets overplayed, the idea that, you know, all you've got to do is go to the doctor and say you feel stressed and you're getting these benefits. But what I do feel is that there is now quite a lot of kind of aspersions being thrown around about how, for example, doctors are overdiagnosing mental health. I don't see evidence presented to support that. And I don't quite understand what is meant by that, because on the whole, when I still do a bit of NHS work, what I see is lots of people who are even quite unwell struggling to get access to NHS support. So the idea that there are loads of people with very low level conditions that are getting access to the NHS and doctors are spending their time overdiagnosing these problems just does not line up with the reality of what I see in the NHS.
OK. Tom, great having you on, and thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Tom Pollard, he's a former advisor over there at the Department for Work and Pensions. Before that, former Deputy Prime Minister and Secretary of State at the DWP. Damien Green was with us. Thank you to both of them. Over to you on this one. I mean, I think he's largely right. You can't just, you know, turn up and say, I'm disabled. Can I have the top layer of benefit, please? Some people know how to play the system. I don't think you'd ever fully get rid of that. I think the reality is that where are we in 5 or 10 years' time? Because it's going to just balloon out of control. The mental health thing, I mean, that is curious that you've got, a quarter of young people don't want to go to work. I think there's something in that. I think maybe Tom there perhaps doesn't see that side of it. I don't know. I think there's definitely an issue around how we define what is mental health. But I also recognise in a weird, very expensive world where things are getting more expensive by the second and we live under strange, enormous pressures around all sorts of curious rules and regulations, and they're growing. I can understand why people, I say this kindly, why people feel they're going stark raving flipping mad at the moment. 0344 499 1000. And by the way, just something to dwell on amidst all the bad news, because there is some good news here, some really good news. Time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning something rather special. Do you remember those elusive Oasis tickets? They could be yours. We've got hold of them at Wembley this summer. Have a listen.
How do you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion.
51 Act is from 1951. The world is a very different place. Immigration and refugees are very, very different from what they were then. The French Interior Minister in 2021 said to Boris Johnson, this doesn't work for either of us. We need to set up a safe and legal route. We will process these people at our shores, and if it turns out they're legitimate, they have every right to come to England because they've been cleared to be an asylum seeker. We'll do it on your behalf. Boris Johnson fell out with Emmanuel Macron that week and decided not to go to the convention that he put on for the rest of the EU leaders. This could have been solved years ago.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
That, we've got a brand new Voice of Doom, for God's sake. Yeah, brand new Voice of Doom is the political mystery voice. If you've not heard this before, all you've got to do is identify who it is. Let's have a listen.
We oppose very strongly.
Right, OK. Hear it again.
We oppose very strongly.
We oppose very strongly, but who is that? Whatever you do, don't bash the numbers, don't phone in on this one because there is no prize, but you can message in if you fancy, just for the shizzle and the giggles, having a crack at this. 87222. We'll give you an answer if we get a correct answer on the other side of the news. If not, it rolls over. Here's the voice again.
We oppose very strongly.
Who is that? 0344 499 1000. But don't call in on that. Text 87222 on the mystery voice, the political mystery voice. Back to your calls. Kevin is in Kent on that issue of benefits. Kevin, what have you got for us?
Hi, Ian.
Hi.
Just a quick one, really. Many years ago, I was out of work and I went to my local dole office and said to them, what am I entitled to? They said £64 a week for 6 months.
Wow. Okay.
I had to go down every 2 weeks to sign on. At the end of the 6 months, I decided that I'd actually got another job and was going to start working. But I did go in and I said to the woman there, I said, what happens now then if I've, used me 6 months up? And her advice to me was, go to the doctors and get signed off with a bad back because you get more money on the sick than you do on the dole.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was the advice from the lady.
How long ago was this, Kevin?
This was 20 years ago.
Yeah. I can imagine that people said that. Do you think today is any different? Because now mental health is being suggested. I won't be unkind to anybody who's got a mental health problem. That's obvious, but it's being said that that's kind of the new bad back thing.
Ian, it's most definitely the new bad back. It's amazing. The other thing I was going to say to you was this thing with, the car thing where they're getting free cars. What people fail to realise is that some of these people, I know a couple of people that get the disability car payment, they get a car, and their kids are picked up from home and taken to school, and the parents are sitting at home doing nothing with a new car. I can't understand how you can get two payments. You get the money for the car,
and the kids get transportation to school as well.
Transportation, absolutely. It's disgusting.
You see, when I said it earlier, those who know how to play the system will play the system. And I don't think it's most people. I don't think most people want to be not working, but those that are, I think it's a shameful crime if you're doing that, because you're doing it with other people's money and stopping money where it could be spent better, of course. Listen, Kev, we've got to go. Thank you for that, Kev in Kent. We got the mystery voice, the voice of doom. Will we get an answer? Have another listen.
We oppose very strongly.
Who is that? If you think 87222 is the number. Loads to come in the next section. Plenty of calls from you. We're absolutely rammed at this end. Headlines at 3 o'clock coming up now, right here on Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Three minutes after 3 o'clock. Welcome back. Yes, this is the home of common sense. Plenty to get through. We are talking Kemi Badenoch saying hitting net zero by 2050 is impossible, with the Tory leader arguing that achieving it would either lower living standards or bankrupt us entirely. This is not just a departure from the bulk of Westminster, because they all think the same on this one, a departure from her own party. Who invented this whole kind of area of we got to get to net zero, otherwise we're going to die. She's changed her tune, shall we say, or the party's tune. Is she right? Can the Conservatives find themselves, curiously, leading the way on this debate? More comment from you on the way. As you've been hearing, Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall has announced sweeping changes to the welfare system. It's aimed at saving £5 billion by the end of 2030, arguing that the current support is failing the very people it was supposed to help and holding back our country. £5 billion is a lot of money, but as the welfare bill balloons year on year, will this money even touch the sides when it comes to saving cash? And e-bikes worth almost £5,000 and capable of speeds of more than 50 miles an hour are being used, quote, almost exclusively for a wave of crime on Britain's streets, according to police. They always seem to be on those pretty top-notch expensive bikes, and the smart money says those bikes aren't used really anywhere else, only for this stuff. Somebody making bikes for the criminal world alone? We'll have more on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk, 0344 499 1000. So, before the news, we had the voice of doom, the political mystery voice bit. This was the voice we played you.
We oppose very strongly.
We oppose very strongly. Who is that? These were some of the guesses. Ken Livingstone. I mean, clearly not Ken Livingstone, right? Ken Livingstone was more like that, wasn't he? Bob Hawke, that's an interesting guess, but it's not right. Tony Abbott, it's another interesting guess, but not right. Elmer Fudd, it ain't. Anne Widdecombe, it isn't. Anthony Albanese, it is not, but it's an interesting guess. The reason why, though, three of those names were interesting guesses, they were all former Prime Ministers of Australia. And the correct answer, as guessed by Darren, unknown location, David in the Cotswolds, Malcolm in Antrim, was John Howard, of course, former Australian Prime Minister. Him, yeah. Very prominent time in office, Mr. Howard had. That was the right answer. Well done if you got it right. Let's move on to more of your comments as well. One in from Gary, who says in 2018 the Conservatives did in fact propose building a brand new super prison near Port Talbot, which would have provided almost 2,000 places, but the plan had to be abandoned due to local opposition and a threat to take the government to High Court to obtain an injunction. Interestingly, one of the people who coordinated that campaign and very publicly celebrated its success was local MP Stephen Kinnock, currently, of course, a minister in the Labour government that is complaining that the Conservatives didn't build enough new prisons and is vowing to tear up planning laws to allow local people to block undesirable developments. Like, for example, super prison. Politicians, don't you just love them? Happens all the time, that one, doesn't it? They're opposed. I saw so many examples of that when I was in the press gallery at Westminster. I'd turn up for these debates and see very heated discussions with, the Tories arguing against something with such heady levels of passion. Then 2010, they come into power, same subject, they have the very opposite view. And you're seeing it now with so many things, Heathrow expansion and issues down there at the DWP, where Labour are going, oh, right, looks like we've got to do this stuff. But a very good and specific example of it happening from Gary there, Stephen Kinnock, now a minister, boasting that they're going to tear up planning rules, but at the time opposing the building of a prison. I do remember the super prison. 2,000 places, of course, that would only just about cover it for, a year or so, bearing in mind the growing population on the inside. And this story, high-powered e-bikes worth up to about 5,000 quid are being used almost exclusively for crime. Police are warning that as Britain battles a surge in two-wheeled offences capable of reaching speeds of more than 50 miles an hour, the bikes are being used by thieves, particularly down in the capital in central London, to snatch phones and handbags. It's a very easy nick. I mean, there's a gazillion videos online that you can look at and see this in action. More than 70,000 phones were snatched on the streets of London alone in 2024, out of an estimated 100,000 thefts across the UK. In a moment, Nick Freeman, the motoring lawyer, joins us. First, Peter Kirkham, former Met Police Detective Chief Inspector. Afternoon to you, Peter. So it seems that the only people that own these bikes are wrong-uns and thieves.
Yeah, sometimes looks that way. I think there are other groups that use them, deliveries, food deliveries especially.
Sure. Yeah.
You regularly see them on these sorts of bike. But at a cost of £5,000, they're not going to be the sort of thing that the average person in the street has as a bike for getting to the shops or whatever.
100%.
And they don't need the speed. They don't need the speed of 50 miles an hour. So lower powered things are perfectly suitable for most uses.
Yeah.
So yeah, they are focusing or focused being used by criminals.
Was it always a mode of transport for a crime? I mean, I appreciate, the Brinks Mat boys didn't really ride too many bikes, but in terms of street crime, has the bicycle always been a tool of the trade for some?
Not so much the bicycle, but the moped.
Yeah.
The moped's been around for a long time. We had the same sort of discussions, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years ago, in relation to moped-enabled crime.
Mm-hmm.
And we only got to grips with that when the police took off the gloves and started to get a bit more tactical with their interventions, taking the bikes out. But we've still got the difficulty of the road traffic law not being fit for purpose, really. The definition of dangerous driving, the definition of careless driving are framed with the average motorist in mind. And the average police officer who's trying to intervene and stop a 50 mile an hour e-bike getting away after a robbery or snatch of £1,000 phone or something, they're not the average motorist. The average motorist doesn't go deliberately crashing into e-bikes. I would suggest that the public would expect the average police officer to be stopping them by whatever means is reasonable in the circumstances. And most people would consider that reasonable, bearing in mind that you're just going to get dents and scrapes and cuts and bruises if you come off, even at 50 miles an hour, if you come off a bike. We had all this over the mopeds, and the law hasn't been changed, as I understand it.
Yeah, and of course it's a very slick form of transport for a thief, isn't it? Because, you know, even if a police car could follow you through the crowded streets of London, which is unlikely, but if it got on the tip of your back wheel, you just go down an alleyway, right? I mean, that's it's very easy to, you know, when the police car can travel at speeds of only about 5 or 10 miles an hour in a crowded capital city, the bike, I would imagine, is a very efficient form of transportation for a street criminal.
It is. It enables people to have a motorised way of following a pedestrian route, basically.
Yeah.
And police vehicles, even police motorcycles, are not going to be anywhere near as manoeuvrable in following them down alleyways and such like. So, yes, it's ideal from that perspective. So I think we'll see more of this. Until they get the message, you're going to get taken out by the police with very robust tactics.
Spot on, Peter. Thank you. It's always a grim time when we speak with Peter Kirkham, former Detective Chief Inspector in the Met, by definition of the kind of things we talk about. Nick Freeman is a motoring lawyer, as many of you will be aware. Afternoon to you, Nick.
Good afternoon, Ian.
I mean, just on that point of chasing somebody on a bike, there's a lot of controversy, isn't there, about the police chasing people on two wheels, particularly motorbikes and mopeds. We've seen that, you know, many times, and there's been some controversial cases. Some have fallen in favour of the police, others have gone against them. But, you know, you've got to be a brave cop these days to chase anyone on two wheels.
You have, and I agree with Peter. I think the police should be given specific powers to do what they need to do to intersect these bikes.
Yeah.
To put it into perspective, the offences have risen during the last 5 years by 730%. And you have exclusive areas in London now which are literally no-go. When we're talking about these e-bikes, an e-bike, in fact, is something, as far as the law is concerned, that allows someone over the age of 14 to ride them. And they're limited to 12.5 watts. Oh, sorry, 250 watts. I beg your pardon, 250 watts. If they are not capable of the momentum at over 15.5 miles an hour, they're perfectly legal and legitimate. Anything in excess of that, and these are clearly in excess of that, these bikes that are coming from China, these Surons, that I think the speed is about 56 miles an hour, they are classified legally as mopeds.
Sure.
So they can't, the road traffic law applies to them. You have to have a number plate, you have to have insurance, you have to have all the legislative requirements that you need for a motorbike or a moped. So my view is, if we had police on the streets, and these items should simply be seized and destroyed. There is no place in London for these bikes. They are illegal. It's as simple as that. You never see one with a number plate on or with the rider wearing a helmet. He'll be balaclavaed, etc., etc. And as you're aware, they're almost exclusively used for criminal offences. So the simple solution is to extend the power of the police and maybe equip the police with similar sorts of equipment, give the police more robust powers to deal with them. But at the same time, let's have a police presence so that the police, if you see one, you seize it, it's destroyed, and the person riding it is arrested. And then they cost up to £5,000, these things. So people are not going to be that happy about having their bike, if we want to call it a bike, an e-bike, taken away.
Yeah.
So the power is there. I don't agree with Peter in terms of dangerous driving. We don't need to go into that. We just need to give the police power more, and we need a stronger police presence. And I think that will go some way to sorting this problem out, because at the moment they have impunity.
And they're quite identifiable, obviously. So
exactly,
absolutely.
I mean,
you don't, and they wouldn't sell. I'm guessing Halfords don't sell these because they would be way too fast for to be sold legitimately.
Yeah, well, everyone you see, literally everyone you see, is illegal. And so if the police are there, thank you very much, I'm having that and I'm arresting you. and it would get round very quickly. And as I say, because of the cost of these, I think it would disincentivise would-be criminals from using this as a mode of transport. But I do think it's important that we equip the police with the right sort of items to deal with them. So there was a recent case, wasn't there, of a police officer who thankfully was acquitted for nudging one of these young men who was engaged in criminal activity.
Just a couple of months ago.
He had 40 previous convictions. He was using one. The police knocked him off. He was injured. That's probably the price you pay for engaging in illegal activity. I don't imagine many people have much sympathy with him. So we need to equip the police properly with powers and with equipment, and have the police presence to seize these items. And I think that three-pronged approach will sort this problem out.
And I would imagine, Nick, that if you are a sort of 14, 15-year-old teenager on one of these bikes, you probably didn't buy it yourself. I mean, you might have nicked it from somewhere, I don't know. But it does sort of feed into the belief that this is organised crime, that somebody else is supplying the bike to you. And, you know, you nick 20 phones a day, your mate does 20. That 100 phones by the end of the day, collectively, they're already in China or somewhere else being reconditioned. Nigeria is another. You've made 50 or 60 quid for your troubles, and you don't have to go to work.
And there's no prospect of you being caught at the moment. So absolutely.
Nick, thank you, as ever. Nick Freeman, the motoring lawyer, with us on that one. It's a curious one. It's one of those conversations that you couldn't have had or wouldn't have had, 10, 15 years ago. People on very fast motorised bicycles. It would have just seemed like some kind of weird sci-fi sort of invented idea from a bizarre B-list movie. They were riding on motorised bicyclists. But there it is. I mean, it's out there in large numbers. And it's also... I mean, having your phone nicked is... I know people say, well, you know what, nobody died. You just had your phone nicked. It's not the end of the world. It's probably insured. Well, it's probably not insured, by the way. A lot of people don't insure their phones anymore. It's a massive ache having your phone taken these days. When you think of what is in your phone, what it's used for, not only is it your personal data, I mean, that's almost a separate issue, but the practical issues of there's the phone itself, there's the card, there's all the other information that might be on there, there's the gig tickets that are also on there, your train season ticket is on. I mean, the list goes on and on. And of course then there's the thought of being robbed on the street, even if it was somebody just swiped it out your hand and you hardly realised it until it had gone. Even if it is that and you weren't hurt in any way, I think that would still be a fairly terrifying experience to encounter. Let's go to Pat down in London on the issue of e-bikes. Pat, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Well, it might cost a nice few grand, a lot of money for the Metropolitan Police, and it's a little bit of maybe nobody's fault of, but when you can't chase somebody through a busy street or down a back street, what you do is you develop a little small drone and you clamp it to the top of the police car's bonnet. So at the, when they've got an emergency on, they just disable the clamps and the drone flies off. They don't have to chase them anywhere. The drone does that.
I have to say, it's a very good point, because although drones are being used now in fighting crimes, I'm surprised at the speed that it hasn't happened at, if that makes sense. There's lots of implications for it.
If you need to intercept the perpetrator, you just dive right on top, pop him on his nut, and he goes over.
Well, yeah, you could drop the drone on him, I suppose.
Yeah, just pop him on from behind, and he goes over, and he's dazed, and you just go and apprehend him.
Yeah, you've seen the size of some of those drones. I mean, they...
No, I mean, enough... Say like...
I get what you're saying. Well, you could have something in the drone that drops a little something on the bonce of the said dirty tea leaf.
But it's big enough to pick up and put back on top of the...
Do you know what? You've raised a really good point, Pat, and thank you for your call. I reckon we could do a whole kind of phone-in, a whole piece on drone technology and crime fighting, because I know it has been used, and when they're doing searches for missing people or whatever, often drone technology is used. They've used helicopter technology, infrared cameras, that kind of thing. That's been around forever. They're transposing some of that into drone technology. And I know there's obviously issues doing it in the street, because you'd have to have some really expert drone technicians. You can imagine I don't know, hitting a lamppost in Soho down in London, then it comes crashing down on some poor unsuspecting character who's going on an innocent walk down Old Compton Street. You can do that, by the way, innocent walks down Old Compton Street, and there you are, and suddenly you get a flipping drone on your head for your troubles. I would like to think that is probably the reason why it hasn't yet been given the full green light, but it can't be a long way away, surely. Tom in Yorkshire says, when it comes to the benefit issue, I would suggest that the thing we should be doing is implementing an evidence requirement. We should be able to look at the benefit and show the return on investment for the taxpayer. Maybe there's something in that. Maybe they do crunch the numbers. Lash says they are wind turbines, not windmills. There is no grain involved. It's an electricity turbine powered by wind, not a millstone powered by wind. But here is the issue, Lash. Mill is not just defined by grain. Mill is defined by machinery that dispenses products or services in an impersonal or mechanical manner. And there's all sorts of applications for a mill. Doesn't have to be to do with grain, which is why I like the word windmill. I think. I mean, not that much, a bit. 0344 499 1000. More comments from you, more calls on the way right here on Talk.
Go slightly further, I think, Kevin. I would say that anyone who entered the country illegally should not be allowed to apply for asylum. They should be detained and then they should be deported. There should be no room for decriminalising the criminal activity of crossing our borders without our permission. It's as simple as that. And the notion that, I mean, the Labour Party don't even call them illegal migrants. They call them irregular migrants.
If only they were, Ben. They're very, very regular.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
John on the article has done some very simple and effective number crunching. Says, I'm no economist, but if we save $5 billion on the welfare budget and then give Ukraine $5 billion, then we've done nothing more than move money about. I thought saving money was when you put the money aside for a bit of a rainy day. That's a cracking example, and that example could have gone on all over the place in so many areas of absolute monumental government wastage, or areas that we shouldn't either be getting involved in or financing or even bothering about, because there are other more efficient ways of doing things. I mean, if you really got the auditors in down there at Westminster HQ, people would be walking around Whitehall in tears once they realise the kind of stuff that's got to go. One from Pam here in Mid Wales. I've worked all my life in quite a high-profile position. My wages were above average, and I travelled the whole country working whilst raising 3 girls alone. 4 years ago, I found out I was critically ill with a life-threatening illness, which is still ongoing. I'm currently on PIP and universal credit, but I can't afford to pay my rent or bills, let alone eat. I've been told that I have to move out of my family home into a council property, which is cheaper. Unfortunately, the council have nothing available, so I'm sitting on a waiting list until I'm homeless. I paid so much tax and national insurance over the years, and I have no help. I can't afford a carer, so my daughter has to look after me. She's 24, just out of uni, and getting just under 400 quid a month to look after me. I sometimes wish I was no longer a burden. I'm waiting for life-saving surgery that's been cancelled 3 times due to a lack of beds. What is going to happen to people like me in this country? Listen, Pamela, firstly, I am devastated and so sorry to hear of your story. What compounds it, as if it could get any worse, is that Pamela won't be the only one. There'll be hundreds of, maybe even thousands of people in very similar situations where they have worked all of their life, which just really does irk a bit when you've paid in, and the moment you need a bit of assistance, you realise, yeah, it's going to be a bit tricky, that one. I ain't got any money. No, but I gave you the money all my life. I gave you all the pay, you know, the tax thing and that national insurance thing every week, diligently, came out of my wages. That, yeah, sorry, it's not really cut. Right, okay, your system is broken in that case. And to bring in another factor, you can't have your surgery because of a lack of beds, something you've also paid for as well. We're in a right royal mess, and the government seem to think that saving 5 billion quid is going to sort it in some respect. George is in Dundee on that issue of benefits. Afternoon to you, George.
Afternoon, Ian. Thank you very much for taking my call.
It's a pleasure, sir. What are your thoughts?
A couple of quick points, Ian. This mobility card that people keep on going on about.
Yes.
It isn't free. You give up your mobility award that you've been given to get the car.
Yes.
So
one or the other, right?
Yeah, it's one or the other, right? And if anybody's got a Range Rover or anything like that, they've had to pay the extra 8, 9, 10,000. So this isn't free. You have to give up your award to get it.
True.
The second point I'd like to make, I've got 3 points. The second point is, while I was on hold, while I was speaking to your researcher and I was on hold, I'm in Dundee. I passed 6 Turkish barbers and 3 car washes that I know 2 are run by Albanians. This is money laundering in plain sight, and the government do nothing about it. The Scottish government or the UK government do nothing. I know I have such contempt for these politicians, such utter contempt. They have got their noses in the trough all the time, and if they've not got their noses in the trough, they're giving away our money. I was a 40% rate taxpayer for 25 years. 25 years.
It's a lot of money.
I gave up my job, I gave up my career to look after my wife. The government pay me £1.27 an hour for the 40 hours of care that I have to give my wife. Yeah. All I ask for from the government is to give my wife the dignity of having her own income so she could be independent. And they are trying to take that away. Contempt possibly doesn't even come close enough. I loathe these people.
And rightly so, George, thank you. Again, on the back of our previous message from Pamela, I mean, this is, you know, the incredible sort of growing body of evidence of disquiet from people who are, you know, sometimes having to use the system through no fault of their own and discover that they can't. In the meantime, I mean, isn't it funny when people have a pop at others who have a concern about channel migration? I only bring up channel migration because, not because of individuals who might be escaping a war zone, you know, and all that stuff that we hear about all too often, not because of that, but because of the hotels and the $6 million a day or whatever it's costing to house people in the Four Seasons and Holiday Inn and goodness knows where else. At what point did it become uncomfortable for the left wing, because it is mostly the left wing, to hear somebody make that example, that I paid tax all my life and I'm told there's no money to look after you and you're very, very sick, some people terminally so, others just need assistance, some can't get a hospital bed, as we've been hearing, and you look across the room and you see these people being given accommodation and medical care and a phone and all the rest of it. I'm not suggesting, you know, they become millionaires or anything like that. At what point would you not, as a human being with a scintilla of intelligence, would you not make that comparison and go, it's a bit weird, isn't it? You know, I remember my dad when he got ill, and it was a conversation that we'd had. It was quite apparent that he got ill and he wasn't going to get better. And there was a conversation, would he be entitled to something? And even to have the conversation took months, you know, as a family. Like suddenly I think my mum went, oh, maybe you could get some help, you know, because you're clearly in a bad way and it's not going to get better. And I think they made a quick phone call, or my mum might have popped into the job centre or the, you know, the DWP, whatever, and was like, nah, basically, sorry, mate, you know, there's nothing we can do for you. You know, and you think, wow, that's a bit weird, isn't it? What, 40 odd years of paying your taxes and your national insurance, and then you come to this point when you've got a diagnosis for something that you can't recover from, and a bit of assistance might be useful because clearly you can't go to work anymore, you hadn't retired or anything, then maybe there'd be some level of assistance there, and there wasn't. And even if you wanted to push it, you know, if you want to jump through hoops and fill out copious forms while simultaneously having radiotherapy and chemotherapy and going up the scan centre and being in pain and knowing you're not going to see your grandchildren's next Christmas. You know, you want to go through all of that and fill out 7,000 pages for potentially, you know, 30 quid, which you may or may not get. And then you turn on the news and you discover, actually, there's another way he could have done this, and that's to have, you know, nipped across on a boat or whatever the similar equivalence was back then, and maybe got a payout then. At least 39 quid a week and possibly a little Nokia thrown in. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Jeremy says it might seem that phone theft is a minor thing, but it does often involve a punch in the face to disorientate the victim. Fair point. The psychological impact of that, particularly for women, is long-lasting. That's horrific. If that, out of nowhere, suddenly bang, somebody's downed you with a punch in the face and stolen your phone as well. Trying to catch them with drone technology was one of the suggestions. Joanna in Salisbury says, a drone with colour dye balloon that lasts several days. That's true. You burst, the balloon bursts, it drops the dye on the perpetrator. You'd have to make sure you've got the right person, though, from a height. If you can guarantee that, then you're home and dry, or home and powdered, depending on who you are. Let's look at this story. It's our old friend, the pothole. It's back. The cost of repairing potholes in this country, if you had to do all of them, 17 billion quid of your hard-earned, 17 billion pounds to do the potholes. This is according to the annual local authority road maintenance survey. The survey found that 1 in every 6 miles of the local road network, this is just England and Wales, so it's 34,600 miles in all, will lack structural integrity within 5 years. So add that to the picture we've been building this afternoon. Even the roads don't work. The government insists it's investing £1.6 billion to help local authorities tackle the issue. Well, my council tax, and I'm sure yours has as well, has just gone up through the roof again. Edmund King is the president of the AA, joins us now. We're back on potholes again, Edmund. What's going on here? It's like deja, it's like Groundhog Day when we talk about this stuff.
Yeah, indeed it is, Ian. And it is the number one concern for drivers. When we ask them, what is your top transport concern? It is potholes. And for once last year, potholes was an election issue. We did have Keir Starmer talking about potholes before the election. We had Rishi Sunak talking about potholes. And, I always say to people, if you want to know what the big issues are, you can listen to talk radio, but also look at your local newspaper. And there are always letters about potholes. And the reason being is that for many drivers, it causes so much damage. Last year alone, Ian, at the AA, we actually dealt with 650,000 call-outs that were related to potholes. So punctures, damaged wheels, damaged steering, suspension, etc. And we estimate it costs drivers, on average, if they hit a pothole badly, about £250 each. And that equates to almost £600 million that drivers are paying out.
Wow.
And then obviously for those on two wheels, whether you're on a bike or a motorcycle, it actually can be fatal. So it is a big, big issue. The one stat that sticks out from this alarm report, and it is a very good survey of local authorities, but it says on average, a road, it would take 93 years for that road to be fully resurfaced.
Oh, that's all right then.
Exactly. So, Ian, if you and I see a road being resurfaced, we'll never see it again in our lives.
I mean, that is extraordinary. And it's interesting looking at the money as well, £17 billion. So even if the government did throw £1.6 billion into the pot, and I'm sure that number deserves some investigation anyway, even if they did, then you are short. You're well short of the target.
Yeah, no, that is right, but it's not all about money. I mean, what we all too often see is this kind of patch and run approach. So local authorities will go out, they'll see a hole in the road, they'll patch it and run. And if that's not done properly, that same pothole reappears a month or 2 months later. And there's also research that shows, I mean, this report, it says on average, it costs £137 to fill in a pothole. But if it's done on a proactive approach, if it's done on a planned approach, it actually costs less and it lasts longer because they resurface a stretch of the road. So there are ways, it's not just the money. Of course, money's needed, but, there is innovation. There's this JCB Pothole Pro and other things that dig up the road, that clean the surface, that makes it more efficient. And you would think in this day and age that we'd see a little more innovation when it comes to road surfaces and how we fill them.
Yeah, well, spot on. I mean, the other day, I mean, this literally happened outside my door, Edmund. I went, I came back so I'd gone out to the supermarket, basically. I was gone for about what seemed like 20 minutes, and there was nobody doing any potholes or workmen there. When I got back, there was a couple of signs up saying, you know, men working with that little symbol, and I saw a truck there, and I thought, oh, they're about to start work for the day. And I got out the car, I took the shopping back indoors, went back outside, and they'd gone. And I thought, what did they... I realised in the 20 minutes I'd gone to Tesco, that's when they did the pothole repairs. I mean, I don't know what they filled it with, paper mache maybe, but this was pretty swift stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that is part of the problem. I mean, you know, there's a pothole on a cycle ride that I do every weekend, and it appears, it's filled, it reappears. So there's that. What we've also found recently, that there are some potholes on motorways, because in the past, motorways and trunk roads were pretty good condition because National Highways has money for maintenance, and that's ring-fenced. It can only be spent on the maintenance, whereas local authorities, quite often, it will be spent elsewhere. But recently, we had a couple of cases, one on the M25, one on the M4, just before Christmas, where you had about 25 cars hitting the same pothole. So the hard shoulder, luckily it wasn't a smart motorway section, but the hard shoulder was just full of these cars broken down, hitting the pothole. And some of them had hit it with the front left wheel and the back left wheel. Therefore, they've got two punctures. Now, obviously, for repairs, you know, if you do have a spare wheel, you're not going to have two spare wheels, and most cars don't have a spare wheel. So, you know, it is also on some of our motorways that the state of the roads has deteriorated.
Yeah, just a bit. Edmund, thank you. Great to have you on with us as ever. Edmund King is the president of the AA. I know I mentioned this probably every other time we talk about it, but it was the one subject that I always said, the day I have to talk about potholes on the radio is the day I need to stop doing radio, because it's like a boring subject. Who wants to talk about potholes? It's a bit like talking about pruning your bush. You know, it's not really... Stop it. It's not got much of a... You know, it's not a sexy subject, is it? We're talking about potholes. Oh, great. The game-changing debates of our time. Ukraine, Israel, potholes. Doesn't really fall in the category. And yet, here we are in the 21st century. As Edmund just said, it was not only mentioned during the election last year, it's 17 billion quid's worth of damage that needs repairing. Folk are getting punctures, so you can't drive down the road without wrecking your car. If you do wreck your car and have a prang and you've got something wrong with you, you'll have to queue for God knows how many hours in A&E. If you have to stay in hospital, there's no bed, they'll stick you in a corridor. If you need to make a claimant from the DWP, they'll tell you, I'm sorry, you've been an honest taxpayer all your life. Nothing for you in the kitty, mate. I mean, the miserable list goes on. This is an open goal for a party to come along and say, do you know what, we can salvage some of this. We can get the UK back to a semblance of normality. I know it's never going to be perfect, and I know we all wear, to a degree, those rose-tinted glasses. I get all of that, but come on, we're in bad shape. Derek is in Marlow on pensions, benefits, and all that kit and caboodle. Derek, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
What have you got for us?
Right, just to say, I've received notification of my pension increase for 2025-26.
Yep.
And I calculate I'll be approximately about £800 per annum worse off.
Wow.
So
how does that work then?
Well, yes, it works out because I have a pension increase of £533, less the 20% tax, it's $426.
Yep.
Then I've got increase in council tax, increase in car road tax,
yep,
loss of winter fuel, then, non-taxable items such as insurances for cars or car and buildings, and then you've got boiler and water rates going up, gas and electricity calculation, general inflation and food bills, and I've calculated I'm going to be £800 a year worse off.
You can't make this up, can you?
No,
I mean, you really can't. I know look, somebody would say that if you didn't get the increase, you'd be even worse off, right?
Yes.
So I suppose that's how the mathematics are meant to work. But you cannot be the irony cannot be lost on anyone that, hey, we're pleased to tell you have an increase. Well, I don't really, because I got that council tax bill, I think it was on Friday or Saturday.
Yes.
And I thought, like everybody does, it's gone up 5% in our area.
Yes.
And I thought, what am I getting for that? I don't think it's unreasonable to ask that. If you're asking me for over 250 quid a month, what am I getting for my money?
Exactly.
A mate of mine, it is £4,000 a year now, just over 4,000 a year.
Yeah.
So, you're looking at over 10 months, £400 a month. I mean, that used to be a mortgage payment, right?
It did, but you think of business rates as well. I mean, I've been talking to businesses and their rates have just rocketed it out of all proportion.
100%. 100%.
So where are we going to be? People won't have so much money in their pockets to spend, like myself and millions of other people in the country. Where are they going to get the money from to pay for whatever they're paying for these days?
And it makes you wonder why someone like Keir Starmer would even want the job, right? Because, I know he can point the finger at the last lot for a bit. He's got like another couple of months of that, but this is on his watch now.
Totally.
And why would you want that job? Because, I mean,
I can't understand it.
I can't even work out how you're beginning, whether it's hospital beds, potholes, or the injustice of getting a rise but actually a cut like you've just described. I mean, it's a complete it's a labyrinthine nonsense wherever you look. Derek, you've been great. Thank you, sir. Good luck with sorry about the 80 quid, by the way. But I hope the potholes are sorting themselves out over there in Marlow. 0344 499 1000. This one comes in from Sean in Norfolk. Afternoon, Ian. Just ban those bikes. This is reference these super fast e-bikes. Job done. Stop talking nonsense. Home of common sense, remember. I'm not quite sure whether I was the one talking nonsense or someone else. You could try and ban the bikes, but of course you're talking about criminals here. I don't think they're worried about whether the bike is particularly legal or not. In fact, if they're doing 50 miles an hour, they're already illegal and they're still using them. Rob in Coventry, it's worth saying that only the Labour Party could reform the welfare system. Really? If the Tories did so, it would be with howls of protest from Labour themselves, and the media would be deafening. Maybe they could decide this behind closed doors, which would reinforce the notion of a uni-party. Just a thought. I mean, it was extraordinary when I remember in 2010 when they started talking about austerity, even though it was a coalition government, even though both Labour, the Lib Dems and Tories pre-2010, remember those TV debates, they were virtually falling over themselves to tell the nation that they would have to make some tough decisions and they were all going to have to introduce some sort of programme of austerity. They all said it. As it turns out, the Tories got the largest share of the vote, but not enough to form a government. So they did it with the Lib Dems, but it would have happened then with Labour. But of course, when the Tories went on a crusade of austerity, oh no, that wasn't done in the name of prudency. By the way, quite a lot of it was a waste of time and effort, by the way. But it was an act of evil. That was the point. It was an act of evil. They did it because they liked doing it. Whereas the Labour Party, they're doing it because they have to do it, because there ain't any money. Bless them. That's just the way it works. 0344 499 1000. Back with more from you in a couple of moments. Time first to find out how you could be, this is a stunner, in with a chance of winning those almost elusive Oasis tickets for Wembley this summer.
How do you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion.
Has it caused some turbulence? Of course. Has it on the edges caused some people to be disconcerted? Yes. Does it make a fundamental difference to what we're going to do on May the 1st? No. And does it make almost any difference in the country? Virtually none whatsoever. So, you know, obviously members think, well, he was doing some good stuff, he was doing some good work, he was putting out some good tweets. You know, why is this happening to him?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Let's go back to your calls. Jeremy Carr's going to be here at 4, but he'll pop in a few moments to tell us more. Nigel is in Oxford. How are you doing, Nigel?
I'm very well, Ian. Yourself?
Yeah, very good, thanks.
Excellent. Love your show.
Thank
for
you.
Your great talking attitude. It's great.
No problem at all. Fire away.
So I had a question, really, more than anything, which was, do we know what the financial burden of final salary pensions in the public sector is? Because it strikes me that, you know, final salary pensions are a thing of the past in the private sector, but they still exist in the public sector. When you take it into account in terms of compensation,
yes,
is it really viable to continue these schemes going forward?
I mean, it's a great point, isn't it? I mean, but is anyone going to raise their head above the parapet and ask that, Nigel?
I think they should, because there's a reason that because there's another point here, which is because they're non-contributory, you don't pay into them. Well, you do effectively through your salary, but
of course
it's involuntary. So if you had a voluntary defined contribution pension rather than defined benefit scheme, would it motivate people to perhaps work harder? And is there a culture of, well, I'm just waiting to get my pension?
Yes, I think there is a lot. I think there's a big culture of that, isn't there?
Yeah, and if that was closed, then would people, you know, work harder to contribute to their pension and pay towards their retirement? And would that perhaps solve some of the lack of productivity that you might see in those sort of industry? I think in the past it was always the assumption, well, we don't get paid the same as the private sector, so all we have is our pensions. But through all the public sector pay rises we've seen, if that is now equalised, does that undermine that argument?
Yeah, well, that's true. And some get paid as well, and more, of course. You know, there's thousands, tens of thousands that are on big six-figured salaries. And, of course, they've, you know, I don't know how they're doing it these days, but I'm sure you'll remember, Nigel, you know, some of these people were on these kind of gold-plated retirement packages where you could stop work at 50.
And actually, if from a calculation perspective, you times the annual income by 20 times, and that gives you the cash equivalent transfer value of that scheme if it were to be transferred out into a private sector pension, into a private pension. So actually, there's never taken into account when you look at all the pay rises in the public sector. I've heard of stories where people have only worked in the local council for 4 or 5 years, and they end up with a 10 grand a year pension, which is actually worth 200 grand as a pot. And that's got to be funded through failings over many years, because the state doesn't pay into the scheme as they do as a private individual would do a pension.
Yeah,
it's basically tax, isn't it? That we're funding for the future. So the core, I guess, was thinking about the burden on the state going forward.
Yep.
And is it really sustainable?
Is it sustainable? I think we know the answer to that, sadly. Listen, great point raised. Nigel, thank you. Nigel in Oxford. Steve is in Cornwall. On council tax, Steve, another strange element of 21st century living. What are your thoughts? Afternoon to you.
Yeah, just a quick summary. Mother passed away in April last year. She'd been alone in the family house for 4 years, paying the single person allowance. We advertised the property for sale, no takers because of the current climate, as you can imagine.
Yep.
And we've just received a letter today demanding 2 times the maximum charge, which comes to £2,500 for an empty house, which they want paying immediately.
Do you know what?
Sefton Council in Liverpool.
I had this conversation literally an hour before we came on air today with one of the guys in the office, because it used to be if you had an empty house, you wouldn't pay council tax on it, right? But now, I think the theory is they want to encourage you to sell it, which I'm sure you're trying to do anyway. And so so it's the top band for the entire year, right?
It's 2 times what the maximum band is. Yeah.
I mean, why are you penalised for having an empty house?
Well, the house has been on the market and there's no interest. I mean, it's a lovely house. In a nice part, well, it's in Crosby in Liverpool there. Desirable place. The housing market is on its knees.
Yep.
They've sort of said, well, you can have 6 months advertising it. After that, classed as an empty house, and you pay 2 times what the
that is like Tony Soprano couldn't have come up with that, could he, Steve? I mean, really?
Crazy.
Unbelievable. Listen, it's just another classic example of the world turned upside down. Thank you, Steve, in Cornwall. I just saw a man's been found guilty of stealing 4.8 million quid's worth of gold toilet from Blenheim Palace. It was an art exhibition. The police were hoping to nick him soon, but they didn't have anything to go on. See what I did there, Joseph?
I do see what you did, but I do know about this robbery.
What do you mean you know?
I can't say any more, but I do know the story. Now listen, the kids are listening. They've taken to tuning in to listen to you.
That's good.
We have the TV on ready to watch. Say hello to Oliver. He's off sick today.
Oliver, yeah, my little boy's off sick as well.
Oliver's off sick today.
Oliver's off sick today. That's a book. How are you, Ollie? There you go.
Very nice, very cool. Iris is there. She's got a bit snuffly.
You got the sniffles, Iris.
Do you want to say hello to your girlfriend?
Hi, Iris. I'm afraid we've come to an arrangement now.
What, you and Vic?
Yeah.
Don't like to talk about it now. OK. Listen, one of those weird days yesterday where there seemed to be an awful lot, but you know what resonates with our audience is not always what I mean, look,
100%.
Donald and Putin are having a phone call. I'm not trying to be rude. Most people want to know why. You really touched me with your story about your dad. I was in makeup. I think that I took a call yesterday from a woman who's worked all her life. Worked for 39 years in A&E. Was attacked twice, had to give up, hasn't got jack help from anybody, is skint, can't pay her rent.
Unbelievable.
And you do then go, this isn't racist to say you can arrive on a boat and get everything, and you've given 40 years.
You would
to
not
pay
be
your
human
tax.
if you didn't at some point make that comparison. And there's many other comparisons you can make as well, but I mean that one really jumps out at us at the moment.
Of course it
When
does.
you're spending $6 million a day on hotels.
Yeah. 8, I think.
8, I think.
I mean, I've got, of course, Labour's announced their welfare cuts, and the question is, have they gone far enough? Will it actually happen? Are they too busy placating everybody?
Yep.
What have we got today? Taxpayers are footing a £130 million a year bill for disability benefits linked to alcohol and drug abuse. Now, listen, in my ex-life, I used to say repeatedly, and people will get upset, you put that stuff inside you. Why? Honestly, I mean, sorry. I understand addiction's a terrible thing, but there is about responsibility. It's like this yesterday we had kids don't want to work because they're anxious.
Yeah.
We didn't get a chance to be anxious, man. We had to go out and graft. Otherwise you had Jack. You know everything.
Well, I was a guest on your previous show. You were the one that told me to give it up.
There's another woman and another story, wasn't it? It was all going on. Just repeatedly DNA tests everywhere.
Pesky detectors.
Bad, not interesting. Came out, net zero. But did you see